Great. Well, good morning and welcome to our first ever ELAP conference. I'm Jen McLaren, conference co-chair, and we are so excited to have all of you joining us and for you to hear from all of the great presenters. When we first started planning this event, we were completely unsure how many people would be interested in coming. The environmental laboratory community overwhelmed us with just over 800 people registered to be here for this event. We hope this conference gives you a chance to learn from some of the best, have some of your questions answered, keeps you excited about what's coming in our industry, and gives you some great ideas to take back to your lab. We have just a few housekeeping things before we move on. You will notice that this platform is different than others you may have used. As an attendee, you can't unmute yourself or turn your camera on. Any questions you wish to pose to our presenters can be done through the Q&A chat box. We encourage you to put your name in the space provided. On your screen, you should see how to submit your questions via chat. During today's event, feel free to send in your questions throughout the morning. We will pose the questions to the presenters during the Q&A panel later on. If you're having any technical difficulties with the event, we recommend that you leave the event and come back, as that should resolve most issues. Don't worry about missing anything. We'll be posting a recording each day on the California ELAP YouTube channel for you to view at your convenience. If you have any friends or coworkers who are unable to join us, this is a great way for them to view the conference later. We also encourage you to join the fun on our ELAP Conference Slack channel. We put a link in the chat for you, so feel free to stop in, say hello, meet some colleagues, and ask your questions. It is our hope that we can capture a small part of the social aspect of a conference in a virtual setting. You'll even see some of our presenters there, and I'm sure they would be happy to answer questions, just like if you saw them in the hallway at a conference. ELAP members will be stopping in and chatting as well, but if you have any specific questions, it's still best to send an email to our general inbox. Now I'm going to welcome my other half, Catlin, to give us an overview of today and introduce our keynote speaker.
It would help if I would unmute myself, wouldn't it? Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you everyone for being here. As Jen mentioned, we could not be more thrilled by the fabulous turnout and are so grateful and honored to have you all here with us today. Before I introduce our superstar keynote speaker of the day, I'd like to quickly go over our agenda for the day. We're going to, thank you, Leanne. We're going to talk about all things ELAP today, starting with a presentation from Christine Sotelo. Most of you know her already, but in case you don't, she's the chief of ELAP and the heart of our program. Next, we will hear a presentation on proficiency testing from Dr. Chris Ryan, who is the supervisor of the monitoring unit and one of the nicest people I know. This will be followed by a presentation from Maria Friedman, who may also be a familiar face as she's the supervisor of ELAP's assessment unit. She'll be providing some tips and tricks on how to ace your assessment, so definitely stick around for that. Next up will be Kate Hilty, our Administrative Operations and Communications Lead, with a presentation on the accreditation process, which we all know is an extensive one. Finally, we will finish off our masterclass in accreditation with a presentation from our technical expert, Chris Hand. He will be providing you with some very helpful questions to ask yourself when modifying your quality system to meet the requirements of our updated regulations. As promised, at the end of the presentations, we will be a Q&A panel consisting of all 5 of our expert ELAP staff members. This panel will officially be available from 10:35 to 10:55. However, they will stick around for a little while after the conference until 11:15 to answer any additional questions you may have. From 11:15 to 11:35, we will hear from our third-party assessor agencies, who will stick around until 11:45 to answer questions. With that, let's get started. I'd like to introduce State Water Resources Control Board member Laurel Firestone as our keynote speaker today. Laura was appointed to the board in early 2019 by Governor Gavin Newsom. Prior to joining the board, she co-founded and co-directed the Community Water Center, which is a statewide nonprofit environmental justice organization based in California's Central Valley and Central Coast. Her career has focused on ensuring all Californians have access to safe, clean, and affordable drinking water. Laurel has received a variety of awards and recognitions for her work, including the James Irvine Foundation's Leadership Award in 2018 and the Gary Bello Public Services Award by the Harvard Law School in 2013. Laurel has served on the Tulare County Water Commission from 2007 to 2012, as well as a variety of state policy advisory committees. She's partnered with universities to develop research and clinical programs to further the human right to water, and written articles and publications related to drinking water and the environment. Laurel graduated with honors from Harvard Law School and holds a BA, magna cum laude, in environmental studies from Brown University. Laurel Firestone, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. And thanks to all the staff and speakers that have done an amazing job pulling together this really impressive program. So as I look at the core of our mission at the State Water Board, be it protecting public health or natural ecosystems, or the many users of water in California, there's one central building block, and that is water quality data. So one of the most essential and fundamentally powerful tools each agency, business, and California relies on is the ability to detect and understand what's in our water. Some of you may know that prior to joining the board, I've spent my career working with many of the approximately 1 million Californians that lack access to safe drinking water in their homes each day. Many of our hardest working families, some of our most vulnerable neighbors, and too many of our underserved communities have to worry about what's in their tap water at home, at school, and at work. One of the first women I worked with lived in a small town of Decorah. She and her neighbors wanted to know what was in the water that was coming out brown into her home and her kids' school. And it's the work that you do that helps answer that question. And it's the work that you do that's necessary to drive the ability to change that reality. At the state, we're committed to ensuring all Californians have access to safe, clean, and affordable water. And to do that, we need high quality and legally defensible data to drive actions and decisions at all levels. The work that the laboratory community does is mission critical for the state of California. And we know that the water boards and ELAP share these same goals with each of you in the laboratory community. We're committed to working with you as partners to share ideas, to learn, to foster continuous improvement. We're in a new era of ELAP. The regulations we adopted have modernized ELAP, allowing the program to better serve both our regulatory partners and laboratories. But we know transitions are hard, and we're committed to our shared success. We have a comprehensive compliance assistance campaign to help laboratories transition into compliance with these new requirements. And we're really focused on collaboration as a core value. So thank you all for participating in this year's conference and for all the work that you do. Together, we'll ensure that we have the analytical data building blocks necessary to build a California for all. Thank you for having me here with you all to kick off this amazing conference. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to you all, I think maybe to Christine.
Hi, everyone. This is Christine Sotelo. Thanks, Laurel, for that opening speech. It was perfect. Thank you for summarizing exactly how we feel that the lab community is so important and mission critical for what we do here at the board. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the first ever Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Conference, which was created just for you, the California laboratory community. So we're super excited about everyone joining us today and look forward to the couple days of events that we have planned for you. Do we have a PowerPoint that we want to share for everyone? Awesome, thank you so much. All right, that was an awesome intro from Laurel. She basically summarized the sentiments that I have for all of you, is that you all are critical and important in the work that you do, and excited about this conference. So thank you for joining us. Next slide. So for those of you who have never seen me before, here I am. I'm the program chief of ELAP. I've been with the program since 2014, since it's moved over from CDPH. And I'm happy to lead this team of ELAPers that are helping to organize this conference for you. Next slide. So my opening speech is really to talk about the new era in ELAP as Laurel described, and it's what we're describing as ELAP 2.0. Next slide. What does that mean exactly? It really is a more superior version, advanced version of a concept, and that's how we're viewing ELAP, is with the new regulations, which has modernized ELAP and helping the laboratory community become better, as well as help ELAP improve. And we wouldn't be able to do it without you. And this conference is really an example of the 2.0, that we brought together a lot of speakers and presenters that will help you learn, discover, and improve your laboratory, and bringing everyone together at this conference. So next slide, please. So before we talk about the future of the next phase of ELAP, I want to acknowledge the past and recognize that it has been a bumpy road for all of us the last several years. So many of you in the audience today and watching wanted a different path for ELAP, and that's okay. But I think what we need to do, looking forward to the new ELAP and the new improved community, is to acknowledge that there were restraints and problems in the past adopting the regulations, but we can look forward to a new phase and a new road for both of our communities. Next slide, please. So looking at the future, you know, as I've mentioned before, we see it as a new era with new regulations and really helping to elevate and amplify the lab community of your role and importance, because we all have a shared goal, and the way to do that is through collaboration and our mutual path towards improving ELAP and the community. Next slide, please. So what are these shared responsibilities? And we talk about it a lot, how the work that you do is important and that you're mission critical, but what is it exactly? It's critically important because, as you can see, in order to protect California and public health, we all have to work together. The regulators determine the objectives to preserve public health and the environment, and they weigh the advantages and disadvantages of the methods that you run in your laboratory. And they request accreditation for those methods so that they have the defensible data. ELAP comes in by ensuring that your methods are, that you are running the methods and are competent to do so. We have behind the scenes work as well to consult with the laboratory, the regulatory agencies and community, and we help advocate for you all to ensure that data quality is used for important environmental decision making. And where you come in, which is really critical, is you're generating that data for those decisions. And you're upholding scientific integrity and provide that critical information and feedback to the regulators and ELAP to make those important decisions. So it's a very important role, and we believe you all are critical, and we want to help elevate you and amplify your role in environmental public health. Next slide. So what is my hope for this conference? As I mentioned earlier, I'd love for you to learn, discover, and improve your laboratories these next 3 days, and find value in what you hear from the presentations. The first day, helping you sail through your accreditation process. The second day focuses on new science, so you can learn about emerging concerns and new science. And the last day, helping you continuously improve your laboratory with the tools that we provide in the presenters' talks. So hopefully this gives you a glimpse of what I mean by ELAP 2.0, this conference designed just for you, our critical laboratory community. And hopefully that this will help you make the connections and strengthen relationships with all of your fellow laboratory colleagues the next 3 days. Next slide. So thank you so much for joining us and for the overwhelming response to this conference. It's a sign that we're all moving together, collaborating to improve ELAP and the community, and helping to elevate this community on its importance in the environmental and public health importance in California. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand it back over to Jen or Kat, our co-chairs.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine, for all of the insights into the ELAP program. Please keep in mind that we will be holding a Q&A panel at the conclusion of today's presentations, but feel free to type your questions in anytime and we will answer them during that session. Next, we would like to welcome Dr. Christopher Ryan. Chris Ryan received a bachelor's degree in biological sciences and a PhD degree in biochemistry from Southern Illinois University. After finishing his studies, Dr. Ryan went on to complete postdoctoral fellowships at the University of California, Los Angeles. In 2013, he joined the Environmental Chemistry Laboratory with the California Department of Toxic Substances Control as a research scientist. Dr. Ryan accepted a position in the Drinking Water and Radiation Laboratory with the California Department of Public Health in 2014. In 2016, Dr. Ryan joined California ELAP. In his current position, he is the supervisor for the monitoring unit, where he oversees review of proficiency test studies to ensure laboratory compliance with program procedures and regulations. It's all yours, Chris.
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today. In my presentation, I am going to be providing some tips for meeting the PT requirements for California ELAP. Next slide. Can you go back? There you go. So the first tip I have for you all is to check out our regulations. California ELAP has new regulations that are effective as of January 1st, 2021. The regulations can be found on our website. I have a screenshot of our website here. If you scroll down to about halfway to the bottom of the website, you will see a link to laws and regulations. Clicking on this link will take you to the full text of the regulations. Next slide. I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already done so, to read the regulations, and in particular, carefully read the proficiency testing sections. I have a screenshot here of the main proficiency testing section of the regulations. That would be section 64802.15. Next slide. The next tip I have is to understand the accreditation cycle. It's really very difficult to meet the PT requirements for ELAP without understanding the accreditation cycle. So let's go through it. Every laboratory has a 2-year accreditation cycle. The accreditation cycle begins with the effective date on your lab certificate and ends with the expiration date on your lab certificate. The 2-year cycle consists of a first year, called the annual year, and a second year called the renewal year. Proficiency test results are required for each field of accreditation for each of the 2 years. Laboratories have a full 12 months to complete all the required PTs for the first year. In the second year, the requirements are a little different. Labs only have 9 months, not a full 12 months, to complete all the required PTs for the second year. The reason for this is that your lab's renewal application is due 90 days prior to the current certificate expiration date, and all PTs must be completed and submitted with that renewal application. Therefore, labs only have 9 months, the second year of the accreditation cycle, to complete all of the required PTs. Next slide. So we've talked about reading the regulations and about understanding the accreditation cycle. The next tip I have is to know when your lab's PTs are due. This can get complicated with all the dates and the 2-year cycle, so stay with me as we go through this. Let's take a look at an example of a fictional lab that we will call Cal Lab. Cal Lab, like all ELAP labs, has a 2-year accreditation cycle. That cycle consists of a first year, called the annual year, and a second year, called the renewal year. Cal Lab has a certificate effective date, or a certificate start date, of June 1st, 2021. Cal Lab's first year annual PTs are due on or before May 31st, 2022. It's important to know that to meet the first year annual PT requirements, the close date of all Cal Lab PT reports must be within this time frame. The PT reports must have close dates that are between June 1st, 2021 and May 31st, 2022. Cal Lab's second year renewal PTs are due on or before March 2nd, 2023. Notice that March 2nd is 90 days prior to Cal Lab's certificate expiration date. And again, it's important to note that to meet the second year renewal PT requirements, the close date of all Cal Lab PT reports must be within this time frame. The PT reports must have close dates that are between June 1st, 2022 and March 2nd, 2023. If this slide is a little confusing, I understand. It's difficult and it can take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort to understand when your laboratory's PTs are due for each of the 2-year accreditation cycle. But hopefully this example that we went through was helpful. Next slide, please. So the next tip I have is that each FOA requires a PT. An FOA is a field of accreditation, and a field of accreditation is an analyte method matrix that ELAP accredits for. So let's take an example. If your laboratory is seeking accreditation, is that each FOA requires a PT. Okay, let's try that again. So if your laboratory is seeking accreditation for TSS, total suspended solids, by Standard Method 2540D 2011, in our FOA Table 108, inorganic constituents in non-potable water, a PT is required for that FOA. If your laboratory is only seeking accreditation for that one FOA, then there's just one PT required. If, on the other hand, your laboratory is seeking accreditation for 300 FOAs, then there would be 300 PTs required. Each FOA requires a PT. There are some exceptions to this general rule, but they're rare, and the best rule to go by is that each FOA requires a PT. Next slide, please. Also important to keep in mind is that the matrix of your PT sample matters. Each FOA table, each field of accreditation table is associated with a matrix. ELAP matrices include drinking water, wastewater, and hazardous waste. Your proficiency test sample matrix must match the matrix of the FOA. Drinking water FOA tables, drinking water FOAs require drinking water or water supply PTs. Wastewater or non-potable water FOA tables require water pollution PTs. Hazardous waste FOA tables, laboratories have a couple of options. You can select aqueous matrix for your hazardous waste FOAs. In those cases, you would want to do a water pollution PT. Also, an option under the hazardous waste FOAs is to select solid matrices. In those cases, you would want to be doing a soil PT. Next slide. The next tip I have is that correct PT reporting is important. It's actually really important. All proficiency test reports must have an acceptable PT evaluation from the PT provider. That should be a given. It's not sufficient just to do a PT. You have to do a PT and pass one. All proficiency test reports must have the correct analyte and the correct method reported. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. All proficiency test reports must be in the correct matrix. So we just talked about that in the previous slide. And all proficiency test reports must be within the acceptable time frame. We discussed that earlier in the presentation, understanding the accreditation cycle and knowing when your PTs are due. Next slide. Probably the most important tip I have for all of you today is this one, and that is don't misreport the method in your PT. This is a challenge for some laboratories, so I want to spend a little time on it today. So let's go back to our example of TSS, total suspended solids, by standard method 2540D 2011. This is from our field of accreditation table 108, inorganic constituents in non-potable water. In the table below, you'll see some various reportings that laboratories can submit in their PT reports. If a laboratory submits in their PT report 2540D for the method, will that meet the PT requirements for ELAP? No, that does not meet the requirements. And the reason is 2540D does not match the method listed in ELAP's FOA table 108. If a laboratory reported SM2540, would that meet the PT requirements for ELAP? No, it would not. And the reason is the same. SM2540 does not match what's in ELAP's FOA table 108. If a laboratory reports SM2540D and leaves off the revision year, would that meet the PT requirements for ELAP? No. No, the method reported in the PT must match the method in ELAP's FOA table. If a laboratory reported SM2540D 1997 and in this case reported the year incorrectly, either by mistake or because a lab is using a different year revision of a method, would that meet the requirements? No, it would not. The method reported in the PT must match the method listed in ELAP's FOA table. So in the final example, we have a laboratory that submitted SM2540D 2011 in their PT report. Would that meet the PT requirements for ELAP? And the answer there is obviously yes. Next slide. And the reason that is the case is because the method reported in the lab's PT report exactly matches the method listed in ELAP's FOA Table 108 for total suspended solids. Next slide, please. I know reporting PT results, reporting PT methods can be a challenge. Not all methods are listed by the PT providers. The PT providers will list the more common methods that are used for analysis. What you don't want to do is select a method that seems close to your method. It's really important that the method that's reported in the PT report match the method in ELAP's FOA table. Many of you are aware, for those of you who are not, it is acceptable to manually type in the method when you're submitting your PT results to your provider. If you can't find your method of interest, if it's not listed exactly the way you want to report it, you can type in whatever method that you like. This is allowed by the providers. It's also acceptable to ELAP. If you have trouble reporting your results, contact your PT provider. It's been my experience and input I've received from many laboratories that all of our approved PT providers really have excellent customer support. So reach out to them. They can help you. Next slide. I wanted to include some tips on what to do if your laboratory fails PTs. With the new regulations, there are brand new requirements that we have never had for our laboratories if you have a failing PT. Working in a lab long enough, you're going to have a failed PT, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. There are just some steps that you have to take when this happens. So if on a first failed PT, the laboratory has to do the following. Notify ELAP of the not acceptable score, document the root cause of the failure, take corrective action, obtain an acceptable PT, and then notify ELAP of the acceptable score. If on a subsequent PT, the laboratory fails again, there are additional steps that you need to take. Those are, first, notify ELAP within 3 days of the failure, be suspended for that FOA, cease reporting of regulatory purposes, cease reporting of results for regulatory purposes, notify your affected clients, and within 30 days, document the root cause and take corrective action. Next slide. My last slide, I have some additional information on PT requirements and on the program that I hope are helpful. First, all PT reports must be submitted at the time of application. This would be for renewal applications, for amendment applications, and for new applications. If your laboratory does not submit all of the required PTs at the time of application, you'll have to go through the amendment process to have those FOAs added back to your certificate and scope of accreditation. If the PTs are not completed at the time of submission, we do not provide extensions to complete those PTs. Also keep in mind that ELAP does not accept revised PT reports from the PT providers. If a laboratory misreports their method, for example, in a PT study, and they want to contact their provider, ask their provider to update the method, and then send ELAP a revised report, we don't accept those revised reports. Once the study closes and that data is submitted, that's basically it. What you should always do, though, is have your PT report sent to the email address I have listed here. This is the best place for us to receive your PT reports. Contact your PT providers. This is the address the PT provider should be sending the reports to. Check out our website. We have a new website as of about the 1st of this year. There's lots of new information, lots of new content. And if any of you have any PT questions, please contact us. We are here to help. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for all that great information. Again, we'll be saying it all morning, but our presenters will be answering questions at the end. So we will get to all of the questions that you put in the chat box then. Next, we'd like to welcome Maria Friedman. Ms. Friedman manages the assessment unit of the California Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program and is a member of the program's management team. She has more than 25 years of experience in multiple roles in the environmental laboratory industry and served for over 11 years as quality manager for commercial laboratories in California. She is a U.S. EPA certification officer for organic and inorganic chemistry, microbiology, and parasitology in drinking water, a certified ISO IEC 17025 lead assessor, a certified quality auditor, and a certified Lean Six Sigma black belt. She holds an MBA and a BS in chemical engineering. Well, please help me in welcoming Maria.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. So this is Maria Friedman. I am the Chief of the Assessment Unit of ELAP under Christine. Today, what I'm going to be talking about are pointers and tips on how to ace your next laboratory assessment. So we'll go through it, and hopefully at the end of the day or your next assessment, you're gonna get an A+. Next slide, please. So what are assessments for? What is the purpose? So basically what we'd like to do is make sure that everyone in the laboratory are adept or know what's going on in their operations. So we evaluate the laboratory's ability to perform the analysis in their FOAs. We look at technical capability, we look at your quality systems. So who does them? They have to be outside agencies outside your laboratory. It could be ELAP assessors, or it could be any of the ELAP approved third-party agencies. Next slide, please. So how are these assessments done? So you can see here, there could be different combinations. It could be a desk review of data packages. As you may already have known, we request data packages or pre-assessment documentation and records from laboratories, and we review them off-site. There could be also on-site assessment. There could be remote assessment, and as I mentioned, any combination of the above. And how often are those done? So it says here every 2 years, and that's in our regulations, every 2 years. Next slide, please. So what do assessors do? So you can see here the basic elements of assessments. So assessors review the quality system documentation and analytical procedures, just like we review the pre-assessment documents and records that we request of laboratories. We interview analysts, we witness laboratory activities, and watch for telltale signs of an effective quality system. These are some examples I listed here, but we will talk about them in detail. So mainly, we don't want to see any expired standards left out that anybody could make a mistake, use them. You must be consistently monitoring support equipment. You have current MDLs, demonstration of capabilities or training. You have those complete records, maintenance and calibration activities of equipment. Next slide, please. So how are we going to prepare for these assessments? So just as PT samples are treated like routine samples, the assessor wants to see the laboratory in routine operation. If you are going to put a tremendous amount of effort to prepare for an assessment, then you're doing it wrong. The ultimate goal is to be ready at any time and that anybody can visit your laboratory, whether it be your assessor or your client, and you're ready on the dot. Next slide, please. So it is great if you're ready right now. You have prepared many years ago, many months ago, so that's really great. But those who have not yet prepared, there's really no waiting time. You've got to do it now. There is always something that any lab can do to be prepared every day. There's always something to do. And so at the end of the day, when somebody wants to come in on the dot, as I mentioned earlier, then you are really ready. So there's no better time than now. Next slide, please. So the first place to start is before your laboratory assessment. To get an A+, you've got to do a self-assessment. So what does that mean? That means be the assessor yourself. Just like I mentioned in earlier slides, you can walk through your laboratory, inspect equipment, interview analysts, observe procedures, check your bench sheets, look for telltale signs that procedures are or are not being followed. And what else to do? Keep records. Make sure that you are jotting down real time what those potential deviations from regulatory requirements or methods are. Conduct root cause analysis and plan for corrective actions. So it is a concentrated effort. It's not just for the quality manager or staff to do it. It has to be for everybody. So your self-assessment, the assessor could be your QA, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that QA person or staff as only. The QA manager can approve department managers or other staff they deem qualified, or they give them a qualification to do the assessment. They have to know what to look for. Next slide, please. So what is that I just talked about? It sounds like an internal audit, right? So internal audits are important components of your quality system. They're not only there to help your operations, it's actually for continuous improvement and help you with your forthcoming assessment or your visit by your client, whoever that may be. It doesn't matter, you're ready at any time, right? And as I mentioned, internal audits are done by qualified or designated personnel approved by management. And of course, we have a QA department. If that is the case, they have to be assessed as well. It's not just the lab operations. So that means somebody else will need to assess the QA department or the QA group. In effect, do not assess your own department. It has to be an outsider's perspective. And last but not least, make it routine in your laboratory. The requirement is to do it annually. It doesn't have to be one day in a year. You could spread it out on different times of the year, as long as by the end of the year, everybody or every group or team or department has been assessed. Next slide, please. So what are the examples of what we're going to see here? To review compliance to your internal QA/QC policies. So most labs will have hard copy logbooks. If so, they have to be permanently bound or in 3-ring binders with pages numbered. And all those logbooks and bench sheets routinely reviewed. You can set your frequency of review depending on how busy is the laboratory. We would prefer as assessors that you don't do a review just once a year, because you don't want to wait a year to find out there is a problem, right? So you want to be proactive. So there are some details to look for. Mainly, the review is a sanity check. And QA knows what to look for, and they would train the personnel who they would like to do the assessment. Similarly, the procedure affects or applies to electronic logs, because most laboratories will now have electronic logs. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at maintenance logs, whether hard copy or electronic. So you could see here, there's so many different information that needs to be in that log. So the tip here is to record those issues real time. I cannot overemphasize the importance of recording maintenance information real time. As you can see, you don't want to be remembering all this information weeks or months later. It's hard to remember all this information. So when you see something needs to be repaired or changed or updated, just make sure that those are recorded real time. Next slide, please. Next thing we're going to look for are expired standards. There must not be any expired standards on the bench or in cold storage. And why is that so? Because anybody could just pick it up and use it by mistake. So we don't want that to happen. Similarly, all your support equipment must be checked and your verification, calibration recorded. If you have certificates of analysis from your vendor, they have to be recorded as well and easily accessible. Review those logs periodically. Make sure that they are accurate, especially if there are correction factors that need to be recorded and applied to your measurements. And last but not least on this topic, all support equipment that are part of the verification, they need to be all traceable. Either you give them specific IDs or you use their serial numbers. So for example, if you are monitoring or verifying a thermometer, the reference thermometer ID must be in the log, as well as the thermometer that you are actually verifying or checking or monitoring. Of course, with the analyst name, with the date, and correction factors in that case, and all those need to be accurate, and the reviewer must check all those information. Next slide, please. So we're looking at here, review checklist. Make sure that they are being used throughout the laboratory and that we are only looking at what's current, right? So when you are reviewing data, for example, there's a bunch of questions. The tip here is do not arrow down on those checklist questions, because it signifies to us that if you check each one that you actually look at it. And you may arrow down and have checked all the questions or answered all the questions, look at each one, but that's not good documentation that you reviewed. So it's important that you check each item. And all those internally generated forms identify your lab and your lab location. We have seen several log sheets, worksheets that just start with the information. It doesn't even say which lab does it belong to. Because if you lose that paper, especially if it's not hardbound or not paginated in your 3-ring binder, it could get lost and we would not know where to return that paperwork. And on this slide, it also says, do not forget units of measurement when recording data. Sometimes when we look at records, it would make sense to us what the units are, but if it's not recorded in that log sheet or worksheet, we cannot assume that we are looking at the correct measurement unit. So please be careful. And again, that's a tip for the reviewer for the sanity check, making sure everything is in place. You also need to identify your format for recording time. Some labs will use the AM, PM format or the 24-hour clock. So one tip is the 24-hour clock, there's always 4 figures, 4 numbers. So make sure that you do that. Otherwise, you're gonna have to put AM, PM, but we would like to see consistency. You can use each one as long as you remember the correct format, but our advice or suggestion would be to choose one format. Next slide, please. So all internally developed spreadsheets independently validated by QA. That means if you have a calculation that needs to be done using a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, or however you want it, make sure those are protected. It's incumbent upon your quality department or designee to make sure that those are checked, calculations are manually checked, validated, and approved by management. If you have hard copy files of those spreadsheets or any document or records in the laboratory in your premises, make sure you have access. Make sure that there is a log of what is the record being taken, who's taking it, and when. And the same thing happens when you return the records or the document. Another tip is make sure your MBLs are current. There is a new MBL procedure, revision 2 under MUR 2017. There's no explicit statement from the EPA to use that because it applies for non-potable water. However, you can't go wrong. EPA says you could use it and it's okay to do so. So if you follow that procedure, you can't go wrong. Next slide, please. So the next thing to check are your SOPs. Are they current? Are they accessible near the instruments where work is being performed? It's important because the analyst may need to seek information from the SOP. So one tip for electronic SOPs, make sure you do not put a shortcut on your computer desktop. Because what happens when QA or lab management issues a new SOP and you forget to update the icon in your desktop and suddenly your assessor, okay, show me what SOP are you currently using, and you click that icon on the desktop, then you just click the obsolete ones or the replace SOP. So it's very important that you go to the exact link or the share file, however, the quality or lab management sent you and not on your desktop. So we need to make sure your SOPs are reviewed annually. That is a requirement of the regulations. That is a requirement of the drinking water regulations as well. And make sure you write SOPs in such a way that someone else similarly qualified can follow the procedures as written. So it is important that the users of the SOPs are participating during the review or update. Next slide, please. So as tip to analysts and laboratory management as well, make sure you read the reference methods. And as I mentioned, have an input in writing, revising the SOPs. You may think of procedures or ways to improve the method, except drinking water, we cannot change, right? But there's some other things that you can improve or make more efficient in your laboratory, but you do not alter the SOPs as well. So laboratories might have procedures when there is a change or something needs to be changed because management has to approve. In your analysis, make sure you have a backup to your primary or principal analyst. That is preventive action. So again, no access to obsolete documents. And if you have too many SOPs, so we have several labs with many methods and therefore must have several SOPs, there is a procedure called standardization or a leveling technique. So for example, if you have a simplistic one, if you have 12 SOPs, then you likely should review your one SOP a month. And of course, if you have more than that 100 SOPs, think of ways to devise ways on how to level that out within the 12-month period. Because remember, we have to update those SOPs once a year or annually. And based on experience, I find it easier to review your SOPs annually instead of wait for more than a year, because those information in your SOPs are still fresh in your minds and it's easier to update, fresher also with the analysts who are performing the methods on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So training, DOC's demonstration of capabilities. Make sure that everyone are trained, performs the requirements for initial DOCs, and every 12 months, conduct an ongoing demonstration of capabilities. There are specific requirements in some methods, but in general, the lab can devise its own procedures as long as you have it written and will say, what are you going to do to demonstrate capability for an analyst? So it's not just running for LCSs, right? There has to be training. So you're showing the analyst someone qualified or approved to run the method right now. We'll show the analyst will watch, and then the new trainee or the trainee will watch, and then the trainer will watch the trainee. Then later on, we'll review together and approve by management, and then the trainee is now independent, can do the analysis himself or herself. So standards and reagent containers, they must be labeled properly. And sometimes when we are rushing, we put in the correct IDs, making sure that we are double checking. Even your equipment, support equipment or instruments, they have to be uniquely labeled, even though you only have one. And remember, if you replace an equipment with exactly the same model, exactly the same type from the same vendor, you cannot use the same ID. Each one has to be unique. In all equipment, support equipment, instrumentations, if they're not working, they have to be properly segregated and tagged. So what do we do in that tag? So the quality department or lab management will have to provide the tag, put in the date when it is tagged out, the equipment is tagged out. And while maintenance is ongoing, those have to be recorded if that equipment can be repaired. And when it is back to control, it is going to be whoever approved the tag will also have to remove the tag. And your document list or instrumentation list updated again to make sure that specific equipment or instrument is now back in control and available to use. So what are we doing here? Traceability. We're making sure that everything is in place. Next slide, please. So with reagents and standards, we need to make sure preparations, and even if you did not prepare them, they all have to be recorded. You have to have a log, electronic or hard copy. Make sure we are buying the prescribed grade or purity of standards and reagents as defined in your methods. Make sure the preparations are traceable to the parent standards. They are uniquely identified with expiration dates, even those that you prepared. And of course, do not use beyond expiration date. Make sure they are also properly stored. Maintain sufficient inventory. But as a caution, do not order too much such that they will all expire at the same time. Sometimes vendors give us promos, discount, and the tendency is to buy more than we need because it's cheaper, right? But don't do it. Look for expirations. And typically when you order at the same time, they have the same expiration, and then you don't use them, they all just go to waste. So be careful on such orders. Next slide, please. Non-conformances. If there are non-conformances that are encountered, make sure they are logged and reviewed in a timely manner. So before reports go out, if there are non-conformances, usually there are reviews that needs to happen. And last but not least of that review are project management or lab management, whoever is sending that out, that report to the client. And make sure we follow our SOPs closely and always document what happened, because it is important that we can trace what happened from somebody who's going to requesting your documents or reports from 5 years ago. We must be able to trace exactly what we did. And it's important that all those records we can reproduce. We don't expect to be exactly the same result, but it has to be similar. So let's say if you get a 5.5, maybe you get a 5.3 when you revise, but it's really critical that all these are traceable. Next slide, please. Just some tips here when you send us pre-assessment documents. So ELAP will request laboratories before the assessment for some information or data. Please send us signed copies of the quality manual. Otherwise, there is no way for us to know that management or authorized parties have approved the quality manual. Identify when they are effective for use. It is very important to know what SOPs are in effect at the time you perform the analysis. So if somebody questions, oh, why did you not do this procedure? This is in the method. And then you can pinpoint that at the time it was not yet an approved procedure in your SOP, because you have clearly identified what SOPs, what procedures are in effect at that point in time when you perform the analysis. So include supporting QA/QC with your data package submittals. So for example, in microbiology, we would like to see your incubator logs, your autoclave logs, so all those type of stuff, for example. And please do not send a SharePoint deliverables link, no hard copies. It is okay to send us the documents as attachments in separate emails, and that will really resolve the issues and prevent the going back and forth asking you for extra information. Next slide, please. So when we're at the laboratory, now your assessor is on site or we are starting the remote assessment, make sure we follow safety protocols. Make sure your accreditation certificate is conspicuously posted within the laboratory premises. Otherwise, that's going to be your first finding. They have to be posted. Could be in the lunchroom, it could be in the offices of the lab management, wherever, as long as it's conspicuous. Okay, make it a habit. Don't keep that certificate in the drawer. It has to be posted. I mentioned that you have to have backup to your principal or primary analyst. And when we are talking to the analyst, please don't hesitate to say you don't know the answer if you don't. We don't want lab management or the quality group to be answering on behalf of the analyst. We are interviewing the analyst and we are assessing their competence, whether they know their methods, whether they understand. So it's okay to say no, you don't know. That's why you can say, oh, I need to look at my SOP, and that's perfectly fine. The important thing is you know where to find the answer. And that's why I mentioned the SOPs must be accessible where analysis is ongoing. Do not use a desktop shortcut for the SOPs unless you are sure that is the current one. So that is, I think I've seen that in some laboratories. So let's make sure we are on top of it. Next slide, please. So during the laboratory assessment, if records are to be viewed, they must be readily accessible. If you don't have it, please don't hesitate, just say so. But we would like to know if you have it, because if you do have it, they have to be readily accessible. And at the least, they have to be presented to us before the closing meeting of the assessment. Next slide, please. So for remote assessments, which we already are working with some laboratories, the access is typically up to 4 hours per assessment date because we would like to, it would be a slower process. It will be dependent on many factors, but we have been successful doing that. And so as a rule of thumb, it will be at least 4 hours. And it would be virtual meeting platforms using Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And we would like to request that you have smartphones or tablets because we will virtually walk around with you to specific laboratory areas to demonstrate your analysis for us to witness what you're doing. And we may need to, or laboratory may need to scan and email documents to ELAP. Next slide, please. Now, after the laboratory assessment, so we're done. If during the assessment, we agree that you will be sending us additional documents, please make sure that they are sent. Do not forget. You will receive an assessment report and it will tell you exactly how to respond. Please follow the instructions. When it says laboratory personnel responsible for resolving the findings, please identify a specific person who will be responsible. Do not say it's the organics department. Do not say it's the laboratory manager. It has to be a specific person. Include root cause analysis in your response to the findings, to your corrective action plans. That is a requirement of the new regulations. If you are correcting, finish your corrections. Make sure you include supporting records. You identify estimated completion date for your plan and includes preventive action. So what does that mean? So let's say you are making a change in the procedure as a result of the finding. So we need to know how is that going to be sustained? How is that corrective action need to be sustained in the laboratory? So it is expected as preventive action that you will document the new procedure. And of course, when you document the new procedure, it has to be announced to everybody. So appropriate personnel would need to be training, we need to go training, and you have to have records of such training. Next slide, please. So there are due dates that will be identified in your report when they will be due. So please submit within due date. And if there are extenuating circumstances that will cause you to miss the due date, please don't just miss it. Let us know, and our chief will consider whether we can extend you that extension. Complete and implement CAPs, your corrective action plans, when you say they will be. It is very important to do as you say you'll do, because there are consequences for not doing so. Next slide, please. As Dr. Ryan has reiterated in his presentation, it is important to read the new regulations that's been adopted January 1st, 2021. And there's the specific section for assessment requirements. It is section 64802.20. It will tell you exactly what to do. And you also must read the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Act in the California Health and Safety Code. The applicable sections are in 100.825 to 100.920.5, and assessment is specific in section 100.865. So please take heed. It's important to understand, to know what's going on or what the requirements are in the California Code and Regulations, as well as the statute in the health and safety, that is the health and safety code. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, this is a summary of what we discussed. Remember, an assessment is just a sampling. So I gave you a sampling of what we as assessors look for in your laboratory, whether it's on-site or remote. These are just a few. Make sure that if we say there is a finding in a specific section or department, and you know that that finding affects other sections or operations in the laboratory, it is incumbent upon you to correct those issues as well, not just where we told you where we found them. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, that's the conclusion. Thank you so much.
That was a lot of great information. Our next presenter is Caitlin Hilty. Caitlin leads administrative operations and communications for the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. In addition to overseeing the ELAP accreditation process, Caitlin devotes time to assisting laboratories become ELAP accredited. Recently, this has included overseeing the development and implementation of the roadmap to ELAP accreditation initiatives, including webinars, website revisions, trainings, and transition appointments. Caitlin spent 10 years honing her customer interaction skills in several arenas prior to joining ELAP in March of 2015. Kate holds a Bachelor of Arts in Government and Communication Studies from California State University, Sacramento, and is currently pursuing her master's degree in Public Policy and Administration from the same institution.
Thanks, Kat. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to our presenters for that came before me for those really great and really detailed presentations. And thanks so much to everyone out there in the virtual universe who is joining us today for our first ever conference. We're so excited to be here. And I'm here today to talk about the road to ELAP accreditation and what you need to do to prepare your laboratory to cruise through the application and accreditation process on your way to destination accreditation. Next slide, please. So I know you can't see my face in this platform, but I'm Caitlin Hilty. I have been with ELAP since 2015, like Kat said, and I'm currently leading ELAP's administrative operations. Today, I am doing double duty and serving as your guide on this California road trip. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is an important step for any successful road trip. Before you begin, you need to know where you're going and how you're going to get there. So the end destination of being ELAP accredited is somewhere you have already visited. The route you need to take this time is different. The new regulations have changed the requirements for what you must do before you apply. The other speakers have already said this, but it is so important, and I want to reiterate it at this point. Everyone should read the new regulations text because that is what lays out what is required of you. So it is just critical that you know the requirements so that you can advocate for yourself and so that you can be prepared to apply for accreditation. They're easily accessible on the ELAP Laws and Regulations webpage, so I just direct everyone there to make sure that you read through them if you haven't already done so. One big change in the regulations is that all the activities you must do to be accredited now have to happen before you submit your application. So I want to encourage everyone here to change the way they think about the application process, in that filling out and submitting your application is actually your end point, not your starting point. And that's why it's so important to have a plan and to map your route to that application. And now if we can get moving on our California road trip by going to the next slide, please. Thank you. Welcome to your first stop on this road trip to California ELAP accreditation. And just like these beautiful redwoods on the Avenue of the Giants in Humboldt County, I know PTs can feel a bit overwhelming. Chris Ryan has given some amazing tips today, and we have a lot of information on our webpage about PTs, so I won't spend too much time talking about this, but there are a few important points I want to make just so that you know how PTs connect to your application. The first is that all of your PT studies must close before the due date of your application. And while this requirement does allow you to wait until pretty close to that last day, why cut it so close? What would happen if you failed that study? So, for this reason, we recommend having a plan in place for when you're going to perform your PTs and make sure you're giving yourself some cushion on the timing. The second point that I want to make is that you must have one PT for each line item on the FOA forms that will be in your application. The mantra I use is 1 for 1. One PT for one FOA. An excellent tip that I have heard from some laboratories is that they use the ELAP FOA forms to plan their PTs out and make sure they don't miss any. So they are checking to make sure that they can write a study name next to every single line item they're applying for. That way they make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. And lastly, please be sure to include all of your PT reports when you submit your application to ELAP. A really common application mistake we see is that laboratories forget to attach a PT report or two, and then when they receive their certificate with some missing FOAs, they must go through an accreditation inquiry process to request they be added back on. This is extra work for you, extra work for us, and it takes some, it takes some time to get through. So we can avoid that if we make sure that all of the application, all the PTs are included in the application upfront. Next slide, please. Okay, the second stop on your journey brings you to your laboratory assessment. And just like our famous city on the bay, there's a lot happening at this stop. You have several questions to answer and tasks to accomplish before you can move on to your next destination. First thing you need to determine is who will perform your assessment, ELAP or a third-party provider, which we call a TPA. If you have sophisticated instrumentation as defined in the regulations, you already know the answer to this question. You must use a third-party assessor, and you will want them to assess your full laboratory because it doesn't make sense to pay them for two separate assessments, one by them and one by ELAP. On the other hand, if you don't have sophisticated instruments, you have a choice between ELAP and a TPA, and this might require you to do a little bit of research. You also need to determine which quality system standard your laboratory will be assessed to. The first option is the California regulations, which are essentially the same as the requirements in the previous regulations with two notable changes. The first is the requirement for a data integrity policy and for you to ensure that all staff are trained on it. And the second is a policy for internal audits. Note that this option is only available until January 1st, 2024 during the transition period. The second option is to have your laboratory assessed to TNI or the TNI -2 standard. One thing I hear often from laboratories is, oh, we're not ready for TNI yet. We're just still working on implementing it. And I really like to encourage folks to reframe the way they are thinking about being assessed to the TNI standard. If you are a fair way down the road in implementing TNI in your lab, being assessed to that standard could really benefit you because the findings would essentially provide you a roadmap of what you had left to do to come fully into compliance. So, we know that laboratories are going to have a lot of quality system findings the first time they're assessed at TNI. We know this is going to be true because of all of the labs all across the nation that have told us so. And we're expecting it. We know you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay. And right now we have the added benefit, or you have the added benefit of having extra time before you actually need to fully comply with TNI. From there, you'll need to determine when you would like your assessment to take place. A renewal assessment can take place anytime during the life of your 2-year certificate prior to the application date. For example, if my laboratory's certificate begins today, June 1st, 2021, and expires May 31st, 2023, today is the very first day that I can have an assessment performed that I will submit in my 2023 renewal application. And while I don't need to have it performed quite this early in the accreditation cycle, I don't want to wait until 2023 because the corrective action process can take several months to complete, and I need to have my assessment fully completed before I apply. One really critical change related to this timing question is that you are now required to request your assessment. So under the old ELAP regulations, ELAP would contact you when it was your turn, but that's not how it works anymore. So if you're using a TPA, you can find their contact information on our laboratory assessments webpage. And the rule of thumb there is that you should get the ball rolling with them 6 months before you would like the assessment to occur. So 6 months before you want them in your lab. If you're going to be using ELAP, you will visit that same webpage and download the laboratory assessment request form, fill it out, and submit it to us by email. We're asking for laboratories to get those requests to us as soon as possible. The rule of thumb here is that you want to have that to us a year before you would like your assessment completed. And so if your laboratory expires in the next year, before June 2022, and you haven't gotten started on your assessment plan yet, you're about to be behind, and I would suggest that you get moving on figuring that plan out. Next slide, please. Moving along to your third stop on the road trip to California ELAP accreditation, this is where you will prepare your application. When you get here, you will want to visit the ELAP Apply for Accreditation webpage and be sure to download the most current versions of all forms, including the application form as well as the fields of accreditation tables. You don't want to use the one that you saved on your computer from 2 years ago when you last applied. Because we will send it back and make you submit a current version. Also make sure to fill them out completely, and note that the FOA tables must be prepared 2 ways. The first as an Excel file and the second as a PDF with signature. So from the Excel file you will print, and on the bottom a signature space will appear, and that is where you will sign. And I hope you all are filled with peace and calm, just as though as you are looking out on Bixby Bridge on the Big Sur coastline, because you are so confident that you have done what you need to do to sail through the accreditation process. Next slide, please. Okay, it's your next stop and you have made it to Hollywood. It is showtime. Time to submit your application. All of your documents should be submitted by email, so no hard copies, please. And no shared links, as Maria mentioned in her presentation. It's okay to send more than one email. If you have size limitations, that's totally acceptable. And I recommend aiming to submit your application at least 2 weeks before the due date so that ELAP has time to process your application and make sure you didn't make any errors. We do consider applications final once we've processed them, so please be sure to double check for errors. I can't tell you how many times we have been contacted by panicked laboratories once they realized they forgot to include a critical field of accreditation in the tables they submitted for their application. And once we've evaluated your application, you'll receive an email from us confirming either that we have processed it or letting you know that we found some errors or missing items and asking for you to make corrections and resubmit it. This usually takes us a week or 2 after you submit it, so sit tight. I know it's an anxious wait, but you will definitely be contacted by us about the results of that review. And one new item in our regulations, and one of the reasons this is so important, is because there are now late fees associated with not submitting your application on time. So please be sure to be ahead of the game so you don't have to worry about potentially paying a late fee. Next slide, please. So congratulations, you have reached your final destination of ELAP accreditation. In summary, I wanted to just conclude with a few brief tips. The first is to plan ahead. All of this presentation, it has been about planning. So you know where you're going and you know the things you need to do in order to become accredited. The second tip is to be organized. There are a lot of moving parts and pieces in the ELAP application, and it requires attention to detail. So please be organized in your submittal and in your process and planning. And the last tip is to ask for help. You can go to the next slide, please. Great. And if you're feeling stuck, please visit our website. One big recommendation I have is to read through the application forms now. Don't wait until you have to fill it out. So start there, and then you can always get in touch with us and email elapcalifornia@waterboards.ca.gov. We are still, in the middle of our roadmap to ELAP accreditation initiative, where we're doing transition appointments with laboratories, which is where we get on the phone with you one-on-one and we talk you through all of the things that I just talked about, but just specifically for your laboratory, so we can help you chart your path or map your route to accreditation and make sure you understand everything that's going to be required of you now and also in the future. So, in conclusion, that is my presentation, and I wish you all luck. I hope you enjoyed our road trip across beautiful California, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jen, I believe.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Kate. Just another quick reminder that we'll be doing our panel Q&A after this last presentation, so please feel free to add your questions to the chat box as you think of them. Our last presenter of the day is Christopher Han. Christopher is an environmental scientist in ELAP's Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Cal State University at East Bay, where he worked in a research laboratory studying high temperature and pressure on amino acids. Prior to his role at ELAP, he worked as a lead analyst in an environmental laboratory where he analyzed complex matrices for heavy metals. Christopher is one of ELAP's laboratory certification officers and assisted with ELAP's new regulations, including the development of the regulations checklists available on ELAP's website. Go ahead, Chris, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jen. Hopefully you can hear me now. So I'm here to give everyone a presentation about quality questions to ask your laboratory about your own laboratory's quality system. So if we can move on to the next slide. And I just want to reiterate here that this presentation is really just intended to give you some good questions, some good ideas on how you would go about changing your quality system. It's not comprehensive. It's not going to cover everything. There are a lot of changes. It doesn't fully address anything. Anything I say here may be my own opinion and may not represent the program's determination for everything. So I just want to give it a little caveat. So next slide, please. So everyone here has probably started addressing their quality system to the new regulatory requirements. And they're quite a significant change, especially with the inclusion of the 2016 TNI standard by reference, which will be a requirement beginning on January 1st of 2024. So a question we often get is, where do I start? Next slide. And really the place to start is going to be to read the regulatory requirements. On ELAP's main page, there's a link that says laws and regulations. I'm not the only presenter that has mentioned this before, so please, please, please read the regulations, because if you have a question and if you have a specific, oh, my lab does X or Y, we're going to ask you or point you to the regulatory requirements. So if you've already read those and you can phrase your question in a way that says, well, the regulation says X and I do Y, it'll be a lot easier for ELAP to kind of evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. So next slide, please. I will point out on the regulatory slide that we do have an on-site assessment checklist that does list a lot of the regulatory requirements. It unfortunately doesn't list everything. There are a lot of regulations there that may not be missed, and this is a perfect example of them. The definition section. This is the first section, 64801.00, and it has terms that ELAP uses and has defined. This also includes definitions from the 2016 TNI standard. It has key regulatory titles, such as the technical manager, which used to be called laboratory director, and the quality manager, which your laboratory will be required to identify beginning in 2024. It also has the list of the sophisticated technologies to know if your laboratory has a technology that it uses that requires a third-party assessment agency. And so really you should be asking yourself, do you know what term ELAP uses? And does your quality assurance manual mention the common terms? So some terms are used throughout your laboratory and are defined to be the same thing. So having them in your quality assurance manual would be a good idea. So next slide, please. Okay, so beginning with some notification requirements. There are some key personnel changes that would require you to notify ELAP. There's also PT failures of when you're required to notify ELAP and a specific time frame for those. Do you know what those time frames are? Do you know what personnel changes require a notification criteria? And then there are some client notification requirements as well. I'm going to mention the TNI, or the PT failure. If you fail 2 consecutive PTs, you are required to notify your clients that says, hey, I failed 2 PTs in a row. So do you know what those notification requirements are, and how does your laboratory record those? So next slide. Drinking water, MCL exceedances. This is a big notification requirement as well. And these are requirements because they have the potential to be an immediate impact to public health. So really, you really need to know if your lab does any drinking water, it needs to know who to contact, what to record, what MCL exceedances require notification, because not every drinking water analysis requires immediate notification, and who do you contact in the event that you can't reach anyone. And so these are just some questions that you should think about when you're reviewing either your analytical SOPs, if you have a separate SOP, or if it's in your quality manual. You need to have those documented so you know what kind of steps do you follow. So next slide, please. Subcontracting and report templates. This is another recent change. There were some old requirements that are sort of covered under the new ones. So it's 64814.00F. And these are just kind of rephrasing the regulations to make it into a question here. Does your client know that you're subcontracting? Is the subcontractor that you selected appropriate? And did you determine that ahead of time by maintaining a register of appropriate subcontractors? And do your reports clearly identify which laboratory performed the analysis if it wasn't your own? This includes any of your satellite laboratories. If you're using a satellite laboratory, you have to have a clear identification of which laboratory performed the analysis for every analysis on every sample that you have. So next slide, please. All right, so that covers some immediate changes that you should start with, right? Those are the things that are in the regulations that are regulatory requirements now, but there are a lot of portions of the 2016 TNI standard that are addressed in the future. And so we're going to start with just some general ideas of what to think about when you're reviewing the 2016 TNI standard and updating your quality manual. So next slide, please. So the core of the quality system is really, does it accurately reflect? Like, does your system, does your manual reflect what you do in your laboratory? And how do you know it does, right? Does your system match what you document? Does your laboratory have any management personnel besides the technical manager that ensures that the core functions work, right? A lot of the laboratories that we have project managers or plant managers that have some I'm going to say not influence, but interest in making sure that the laboratory's process works appropriately. And if they need to be included in your review of your management review or your quality system review, you need to have that documented. Your organizational structure needs to be in your quality manual. And so that organizational structure should list any other personnel that abide by and need to understand your quality manual. And then, some other questions in terms of personnel is who does the review? Who does your internal audit? When you find an error, how do you go about fixing it? What's your corrective action process? Do you guys document it using paper forms? Is it logged in a system? How does that come about? And just so some questions just to think about how your system works. So next slide, please. All right, we've had a lot of questions about demonstration of capability. I've answered quite a few of them on in the chat here, so if you have any more, please feel free to answer them or ask them. We also have that Slack channel. We have some DOC questions there as well, so keep them coming. And so really what you want to ask yourself with the demonstration of capability is how do you determine analysts can run the client samples? Just as a reminder, pretty much every method specifies that they need to be completed before routine samples, and they have method specific criteria. And so did you meet all of those as well? TNI has a few options in terms of demonstration of capabilities, and which ones do you follow, right? You need to know that ahead of time, and that needs to be documented in your quality manual or the specific SOP. Next slide, please. So document control, Maria talked about this as well. How do you know that your staff have the most recent procedure? If they don't, how do you know? How do you find that out? How do you issue the updates? How do you track the most recent version? And how do you know that everyone who needs it gets one? right? Those are just some things in terms of making sure that the SOP matches your current practice. You just kind of need to know who has it and did they review the updates. So next slide, please. Measurement traceability. Again, Maria touched on this one as well, because this is a big one on the T&I standard. It's how easy is it to match your reagents and standards to your specific sample results. So one of the scenarios that I always point out is what happens if you get a notification from one of your manufacturers that said, hey, this standard was contaminated and you may need to review, like it was only this lot. Can you easily backtrack and figure out how many batches or how many analyses, or if none were affected at all? You know, how easy is it going to be to find that error and make sure that the results that your laboratory provided are still acceptable, right? How do you know what results were impacted? And then ahead of time, what does your laboratory do to make sure that all of your reagents and bottles are clean and appropriate and match your method criteria? So next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to close out my presentation and we're going to move on to the question and answer panel. So I hope those questions provided you with some good questions to just kind of think about as you're developing and moving your quality manual to being compliant with the parts of the 2016 T&I standard that are incorporated by reference. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat. I've been answering them as fast as I can, as well as some other staff answering the questions here. And if it doesn't get answered, please feel free to drop it in the Slack channel as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jen.
Hello, it's actually me. Hi, thank you, Chris. We appreciate your presentation. At this time, we're going to move to the Q&A panel session. We'd like to remind you that the Q&A chat box is open for you to send your questions. If you could take a moment to fill in your name along with your question, we would appreciate it. It would also be helpful if you could address your question to the person best suited to answer, although it is not necessary if you are unsure who to address the question to. If we have more questions than we're able to answer during this time, our panel will be available for about 15 minutes after the close of the day to answer as many questions as they can. And that being said, we would like to welcome back all of our presenters from today, Christine, Chris Ryan, Maria, Kate, and Chris Hands.
Hi, everyone.
All right. So I think we're just going to we'll start with what's in the chat box, and I'll try and get through as many as we can, kind of rapid fire style. So I think our first one, what happened if the FOA changed after the PT was submitted?
That's for me, right, Jen?
You're up, Chris.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you for that question. If the FOA table has been updated after your laboratory has already submitted your PT reports, what we'll be looking at is the close date of the PT report. If the close date is before our revision update, then the laboratory won't be required to repeat that PT. That's an indication that the laboratory is meeting the requirements, doing what ELAP asks of them by doing that PT. And so if the FOA table changes after you've done that PT, then you won't be required to do a new one. Now, if the close date of your PT report is after the date that the FOA table is updated, then you will have to repeat it. I hope that helps.
That does. Following PT questions, Dr. Ryan, we have one from Stephanie Purley. Is there a way to verify that ELAP has received and accepted PT results during the first accreditation year?
Another good question. No. So what we really need the laboratories to do is to be really organized, especially when it comes to your PTs. It's really the laboratory's responsibility to know what PTs have been done, what PTs have not been done, and and to track that and to know that you've got all your PTs done. It can be challenging. I know that some laboratories do different sets of PTs throughout a year, and that can be difficult to keep track of what PTs are done and which ones are left to be completed. But it really is up to the laboratory to do this, and ELAP does not have the capability to provide that kind of information.
Perfect. I have a question for Kate. What is TNI or TNI -2?
Okay, thanks, Jen. Okay, so that's a reference to my presentation and the options for your quality system standard. And so I can explain that by explaining all of the options. And the first is the California regulations option, which laboratories have the ability to be assessed to right now all the way up until January 1st, 2024. And that is essentially the same requirements that were in the old regulation, and with a couple of added requirements that I talked about, specifically a data integrity clause and a procedure for your internal audits. The other option, which is what will be required after January 1st, 2024, is what we lovingly call TNI -2. And that is essentially the full TNI standard with 2 exceptions that are specific to California laboratories. And those exceptions are related to the PT requirements as well as the laboratory, technical manager qualifications. And so the first exception for PT requirements is that you all are only required to do 1 PT per year. If you are in a TNI state, or if the full TNI standard had been adopted in California, you would be required to perform 2 per year. But in California, just 1. So that's the first exception. The second exception is related to the qualifications for who can be technical manager in your laboratory. And in the TNI standards specifically, there are educational requirements related to, specific 4-year degrees that a person must hold in order to qualify as the technical director of the laboratory. But in California, we didn't agree with that approach, and we really wanted to preserve the ability for our folks who have laboratory certificates from CWEA and AWWA. We wanted to preserve the ability for them to qualify as technical managers in California. So if you visit the website and go to the regulations page and look at laboratory personnel, you'll see that we also accept those certificates to qualify you here in California as a technical manager of a laboratory. And then, so that's TNI -2, TNI minus the 2 requirements. And then also all laboratories do electively have the ability to pursue full TNI accreditation, which would just be, not using those 2 exceptions, basically.
Great, thanks, Kate. Awesome. We have a question from Maria. Is there a requirement for an electronic logbook?
The requirement will be similar to the hard copy bound. So the lab has to define procedures on how to review electronic logs. It could be that they put in their signature somehow in the log itself, electronic log, or keep another record separate that we review these electronic logs separately in a hardbound sheet. So this log, you have to put the ID where it is stored, what it is, and when you reviewed it. So it would be similar. There has to be a procedures. We don't tell you exactly what to do, but you have to devise ways, because there are so many different ways on how those can be reviewed. The gist is make sure they are reviewed. Remember, we're only looking for sanity check, because those records will be kept on file until you destroy the records, right? And the key is traceability. We need to be able to trace everything that we do and accurately. Hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. I have a quick one for Chris Hand. Is ion chromatography considered a sophisticated technology?
No, ion chromatography is not listed in the definition section as one of the sophisticated technologies. I think it's probably the most complicated, non-sophisticated technology that isn't listed on that list.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I think this one might be another question for Maria. If a lab is using a TPA, does the TPA submit the report to ELAP, or does the lab need to submit the report?
I can
We
take that
look
one.
at the TP. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I think that, thanks, Maria, I appreciate that. I think that's really an application question. And so the TPAs are not submitting the reports to us directly. They are sending them to you when they close their assessment, and you are submitting it to us as part of your renewal application or initial or amendment, whatever type of assessment you have performed. So it's your responsibility to submit those with your application, and they will send you many supporting documents like checklists, and those will also need to be submitted as well. So essentially they'll send you a final package, and you will then include that final package in your application when you apply to us.
Perfect. Kate, I have another quick question for you. How does
Sure.
a lab schedule a transition appointment?
Email us at elapca@waterboards.ca.gov, and then I will reach out to you and we can find a time to schedule you for a call.
Kate, you're pretty popular. Does ELAP notify the receipt of renewal fees?
We do not. We do not notify you when you pay us. What we notify you is when you don't pay us. So if you don't hear from us on the fees, then there's nothing to worry about.
I think this one's for Chris Hand. Do MCL notifications include recycled water?
Okay, and I think that was referring to the drinking water MCL violation or exceedances. So no, that would be only for drinking water systems. If your lab only does recycled water, I recommend having some sort of document that says we only do recycled water, we do not do any drinking water. And if you get a client that says, hey, can you test this drinking water sample, reply with that response, so that we are aware of the complications that recycled water has in the way it's currently listed. And so having something in your laboratory that says we don't do drinking water, we don't notify anyone because we don't do any drinking water would be a good idea.
Perfect. Maria, I have a question. Does field collections need to be included in the quality manual?
If the laboratory is collecting samples, yes, there has to be a section that talks about how samples are being collected. The samplers, even though that's all they're doing, they have to read, or they must read, the quality manual. And when they go to the field, those equipment that they use also needs to be calibrated. So only if the laboratory is collecting samples. However, if they are not collecting samples, we still need to see a statement to the effect that they are not collecting samples. So just not say anything, so we know what to look for explicitly or exactly. Thank you.
Perfect. Another one for you, Maria. Once a lab requests an on-site assessment from ELAP, what is the typical time frame for an actual on-site assessment to take place?
It's at least a month, or maybe a plus or minus 2 weeks. We try as quickly as possible to schedule, because there is a requirement to submit pre-assessment documents and records. And we give you at least a month to complete those and send to us, so we have sufficient time to review. And of course, there are so many different variables that affect the timing. Sometimes it could be a rush thing or something that may preclude or not able to do the assessment quickly as requested, but as much as possible, it would be at least a month or 2 so that we have everything in place. And each lab we contact, we have a list of those who request or who had requested on-site assessment by ELAP. We look at them by schedule, of course, and as soon as you submit your request, we prioritize it that way, and we send you the notification and call you back and schedule on a mutual time frame.
Perfect. And then Chris Hand, can you explain the data integrity policy in the new regulations?
Yeah, so the data integrity policy is really kind of there to establish your laboratory's data integrity. And so this is going to be something that you're going to have to work on in your own laboratory in terms of how exactly you're going to implement it. So we're requiring that you have a policy and that the policy is implemented. But in terms of how you're going to go about exactly doing that, that's going to be up to your laboratory, and it's going to need to be documented of how you do it. So some common examples that we see are what happens if you get like how do analysts or folks at the staff or at your lab report anonymous complaints that says, hey, I witnessed an analyst intentionally fudging numbers or that kind of thing. What kind of training does your staff go through on an annual basis in terms of what are things they can and cannot do? A common example we see is manual calibrations, right? When are those allowed? What's the procedure for those? That's a common one that's included in data integrity. Another one would be kind of the how you go about recording things or how changes need to be made. And so single line out with initial and date, that's the industry standard, how you correct anything. But if it's an electronic one, you know, what's the kind of procedure there? Who has access that's allowed to make those changes, that kind of thing. So again, it's going to depend on what systems your laboratory uses to determine how you guys are going to comply with that. So I can't give you any like concrete, you must do all of these things, but I hope that gives you a good idea.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time for this portion of the Q&A. We hope that you found the information presented today helpful. We have 2 more days of great information lined up, so we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Just a reminder that there is a unique link for each day, so make sure to look for the correct day when you join us. We are fixing the links on the website as some people have had some issues today. And I believe we resent all of our links today via email and Eventbrite as well. So stick around and for the next couple days. Tomorrow's theme is Laboratory Science of Tomorrow, and we'll have presentations about 6-ppd quinone and microplastics, ddPCR, PFAS, eDNA, and more. It's going to be another exciting day.
I know that some of you may need to go, but if you have time to stick around, we're going to have some bonus content available. First off, our ELAP experts will be here from 11 to 11:15 to continue answering more of your questions. And then beginning at 11:15, we're going to welcome our third-party assessors. They will each be giving a short presentation, followed by a group question and answer session from 11:35 to 11:45. We hope you can stick around and join us for a few ELAP conference extras. And don't forget to join us on Slack. The conversation has been going all morning and with over 100 of you joining us. So with that, I think we're going to hop back into Q&A, trying to make the most of our time. So I think I have another one for Chris Hand. Could you go over the laboratory requirement for technical director and QA director? And their title and job description should be stating their role as technical director and QA director.
Right. So the technical manager and quality manager, those are 2 regulatorily defined positions. If your lab chooses to use a different name, you'll still have to identify who they are in your quality manual. They are found, the descriptions of what they are and what they do and what their qualifications need to be are found in the regulations. They're also found on the on-site assessment checklist. The quality manager's requirements are entirely contained within the 2016 T&I standard, and it's not a requirement for your laboratory to define one until 2024 when those requirements are there, are put in place as the only available requirements. In terms of the technical manager, your former laboratory director would automatically qualify to be a technical manager, and that's because a lot of the same requirements carry over. And so, you know, it depends on what your laboratory is and whether you're a municipal agency or whether you're publicly owned laboratory or whether you're a private company or corporation. Those are going to depend on exactly who qualifies. But if you have any specific questions or if you need to submit a change for the technical manager, you can email the ELAP's technical manager or the technical inbox, so ELAPCA_technical, I believe it is. And then you can always address the questions to the general inbox because that is honestly the best way that we have to direct your question to who needs it. There is quite a few staff here at ELAP that all have their own specific proficiencies. And so if you have any general questions, email the general inbox. We have somebody manning it every day, and it goes to who needs to get it. So I hope that they gave the answer.
All right, perfect. I think this one's for Kate. Can the same assessment be used for the renewal application and the amendment application?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect.
And it's often probably more efficient to have just one assessment performed for both of those if that works out time-wise.
Okay. And then what are the requirements regarding assessments for labs with secondary accreditations?
Sure, I can take that. And so that is related to accreditation by reciprocity. So bear with me on this because it can get a little complicated, but if you are a laboratory that is located inside of California, we will be granting you primary accreditation based on an assessment performed either by us, one of the approved third parties, or potentially by another state. If you are a laboratory who is located outside of California, then you will only be offered secondary accreditation, also known as accreditation by reciprocity. So what that means for you is if you're outside of California, you have to have a primary accreditation from another body to use in your application when you apply for us. And this can be a bit complex because if you're wanting to apply for drinking water accreditation in California, then your primary accrediting body has to be another state. So it cannot be a third-party firm. If you want non-potable water or hazardous waste, then your accreditor, your primary accreditor, can be one of those third-party non-governmental accreditation bodies such as A2LA, ANAB, IAS, or PJLA. So California ELAP is not granting primary accreditation to out-of-state labs. That's it.
Great, thanks, Kate. Chris Han, I have I think a pretty quick one for you. Can the quality manager and the technical manager be the same person in a one-person municipal lab?
Absolutely. So when staffing is limited, the quality manager and technical manager can be the same person. You are going to have to document this in your quality manual of exactly who qualifies for these roles. If you have two folks, you can alternate back and forth as long as both of them meet this technical manager requirements, right? If you're going to have more than one technical manager, they all have to meet the technical manager requirements. Or one has to be the primary and the others have to be the designees. And so that it kind of gets complicated. But yeah, absolutely. Where staffing is limited, just describe why it's limited. We only have one staff, and then they would both be the same person.
I think this one's from Maria. Does sampling procedures have to be in the QA manual, or can it be a separate SOP?
It could be separate SOPs if you like to do it that way, or we still need to, you still need to identify in the QA manual that you are referencing an external SOP, because otherwise it's harder to track. Remember, when T&I kicks in, there are certain sections that need to be in your quality manual. One of them is about sampling. So you just say not applicable, reference a separate SOP if needed. And that is true for every other procedures that you do that you would like to reference an outside procedure or SOP or work instructions outside of the quality manual. But you're gonna have to make sure that you have all the elements required in the quality manual.
Great. And Maria, I think I have another question for you. So they're asking when they update their SOPs annually and add the current date, where do they record the previous reviewal date so the assessor can see the annual frequency?
So we've seen labs do it different ways. they could append at the back of the SOP the review history. So make sure we're talking about review. We're not expecting that you update your SOP all the time, but it's required that you review them. So some labs append a section called revision history, and they put it in there, and they state in their quality manual, we will record in the revision history up to 5 years of revision, and then it gets archived. Or you could have a separate form where you record the revision, and then you just say in the manual, revision history can be found here. And some labs also put it at the back of the cover page, so kind of in front of the quality manual. It's however where you'd like to put it, as long as you can demonstrate to us that you are reviewing it annually. And of course, when there are sections or update that needs to be made, that you are updating the revision number, the version, the approval, the effective date, etc. of your SOPs or quality manual or other quality system documents.
Great. Chris, Ryan, I think I have a question for you. I believe they're talking about PT failures. You said you mentioned to notify ELAP. Is it okay to notify through the PT vendor since all the results are sent to ELAP, or does the lab need to do a follow-up email with ELAP to let them know directly?
Thanks, Jen. Another good question. Lots of good questions coming in. So what your laboratory should do if you fail a PT is first notify ELAP. So you don't want to notify your vendor. The best thing to do is notify ELAP through the PT inbox, through elapca_PT at waterboards.ca.gov. That's the best place to send in your notification. Then you'll follow that up with the next steps that are required in the new regulations, which is document the root cause of the failure, take corrective action. Once you've done that, you're ready to then perform another PT, do that PT, get your passing score, and then the final step is to notify ELAP again of that acceptable score. You could do all of the notification all at once. That's not prohibited in the regulations, but really the intent of the regulations for when a laboratory fails a PT is really to say, look, okay, we have a failing PT, we need to act on this fairly quickly. And the first thing is to notify ELAP. That's really intended to sort of kickstart the process for you to notify ELAP. Then the next step is to go through corrective action, or do your root cause analysis, do your corrective action, get another PT, and then notify ELAP again. So, and the best place to be doing those notifications is through the PT inbox. It's elapca_PT at waterboards.ca.gov. Thanks.
All right, Chris Hand, your turn. TNI 2016 does not say that PTs can be used as initial demonstrations of capability in chemistry, only ongoing demonstrations. Previously, it was stated they were allowed. Could you clarify that?
Then I stand corrected. Yep. So there are a few options in terms of what counts as an initial demonstration of capability versus an ongoing demonstration of capability. And so, yes, the standard would specify if it's not allowed for the initial one, it's not allowed for the initial one, and you could only do that for ongoing.
Perfect. I have another one kind of related to that. Do plant operators that conduct field and sample lab testing, or simple lab testing, excuse me, also required to do a DOC?
Okay, so this one is a little bit more nuanced. I'm going to answer generally yes. They need to have a demonstration of capability for whatever part they do. So if they're only reading incubators, maybe you would have a separate SOP that says this is how you read incubators, and they would do some sort of check for that. It kind of depends on what they're doing. But generally, anyone who works in the laboratory is going to be considered a laboratory analyst, regardless of whether they are an plant operator or a official laboratory analyst. If they do any work in the laboratory, they have to comply with all of the rest of the quality manual requirements. They have to have their own DOC for whatever part of the test they do. You know, and another one is BODs, right? If they're going to read the DO, but they're not going to do the initial setup or anything like that, then you could have a DOC that just says this is how you read the dissolved oxygen for that day, right? You don't need you don't need to have them go through the whole test if they're never ever going to do the whole test, right? Only the parts that they do.
Let's see. Someone asked, I think Chris Ryan, we didn't see in the application to submit PT reports. Can we send them in now?
So PT reports, as I mentioned in my presentation, are required to be completed and submitted at the time of application. So that applies for your renewal application, any amendment applications, or if your laboratory is a new laboratory, all PTs have to be submitted at the time of application. If they are not submitted with that application, if they're not completed, for example, then the lab will have to go through the amendment process to begin having those FOAs added to the certificate and scope of accreditation. Thanks.
Great. I think, Maria, this one's for you. Are signature pages required for SOPs, or can the quality manual describe who approves SOPs?
They are required in the SOPs. Each one must be a standalone, because unless the SOPs are embedded inside the quality manual, then the signatories or the approval effective dates at the front will work. However, if you are going to use that separately, you have outside documents outside of the quality manual, they must have approvals and their own effective dates.
Perfect. And this is another one for you. What is the difference between work instructions and SOPs?
Work instructions are simplified. SOPs would not require all the elements in the SOPs, but you could put a title. So it's something simplistic, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are what we're doing. Or you can also put that work instructions inside the SOP. So they're kind of like cheat sheets, but they are controlled documents as well, because they have to be approved. The procedures listed in that work instructions must be accurate and agreed to and approved by management, with also an effective date. So in effect, it's sort of a cheat sheet, but it has to have all the elements as well of a controlled document. Perfect.
Let's see. So we're getting so many. I'm trying to sort through and find who to ask these to. Maria, it was possibly answered, but I think it might be helpful for other people. Are spiral bound notebooks with page numbers considered acceptable?
Yes, the main thing is they are paginated, because, and the suggestion is to make sure page X of Y, because that's a spiral notebook. Anybody can tear pages, right? And you don't want that to happen. And if we see missing pages, then we're going to ask you what happened to this page. So spiral notebooks are okay, but you're going to have to paginate. And the recommendation is really use bound notebooks, because even if you have 3-ring binders, they could be taken out. And that's why I mentioned in my presentation, put your lab name, your location in that page. It could be a header, it could be a footer, anywhere, right? So that it gets lost, where to return it, or whoever finds it. And sometimes when you're in sample control, there's so many pages there being moved around, flying around. You want to make sure that those documents are intact.
Great. And we think we have time for one more question. I'm going to pose this one to Chris Ryan. If our laboratory submits an annual PT and a few tests are not acceptable and a repeat PT falls outside of the 1-year time period for the annual PTs, what will we have to do to correct this issue?
Good question. So if your laboratory does not complete all the PTs within the annual year, then that means the requirements for that year have not been met, and the laboratory will have to go through an amendment process to have that FOA added back onto the certificate. Really important to get those PTs for your annual year completed within the time frame. Hope that helps.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your great questions. I'm sorry we don't have time to get to all of them, but we do want to emphasize that if you stop by our Slack channel, we will have our ELAP presenters there answering questions as best they can. And again, you're always welcome to submit any questions to our general inbox, and we will do our best to get back to you. So right now, we're going to welcome our TPAs and to give some presentations. First up, from Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, we have Tracy Zerzan. And I'm going to go ahead and let her take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, my time anyway. Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to thank California Water Boards for inviting us to provide a brief presentation on our current activities with your program. My name is Tracy Zerzan. I'm the president of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. I've been with Perry Johnson for almost 21 years. In certification as well as in accreditation, and we really appreciate the embracing of California with the use of the TNI NGAB program. Next slide. Just a little bit about our accreditation body. We're in Troy, Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit. We also have offices all over the globe, Mexico, Japan, Italy, UK, and parts of the Middle East. We are an ILAC MRA signatory for our ISO programs for various different fields for testing, calibration, inspection, reference material, and medical. And we also have national recognitions with the state of Florida, California. Also, I apologize, I forgot Minnesota. We work with the DOD, DOE, TNI for the NGAB program, as well as the NEFAP field sampling. And we have about 1,500 accredited facilities. Next slide. So our experience in the environmental industry, we have about 222 environmental accredited laboratories, ranging from various standards there, primarily in the 17025 world, DOD and DOE, and now picking up in the TNI non-governmental accreditation program. We also work with the EPA for their lead testing program and have some TNI NEPAP sampling organizations. Here are just our fields. This was probably, and this is not an exhaustive list, we do accredit a various amount of laboratories for drinking water, non-potable water, solids, air, asbestos sampling, etc. Next slide. So currently for California, we have 9 California ELAP customers so far. Here's a breakdown of the choices of standards that the facilities have came to us with. We have 3 that have just chosen at this point to get the California regs only, 4 that have selected California ELAP and the full TNI standard, and 2 that have California ELAP and TNI -2. So we do have a lot of interest. We have 40 quotations that we've offered that people are looking at, I think, probably at all of us and looking at the different prices between us and who's going to be their best fit. So we're hoping that we'll be gaining more. I'm sure we will, as everyone is coming up to that deadline soon. We have completed 4 assessments so far. Some are still pending some final reports and corrective action responses. Next slide. Here's a breakdown of where our findings are. So primarily you'll see there that we have the majority of our nonconformities, which I think everyone would expect, which is in the larger area of the TNI standard volume 2 module tool, which is management and technical requirements. And this is primarily the bulk of our assessments. And then we range there in a variety of different specific modules, and some particularly on the California regs. Next slide. I know that a lot of this was already covered previously, but just a little bit of a recap on the California process for us. As we would expect an application to be provided to us. with basic information of your organization, with the copy of your California scope or scope that you're maybe even going to be applying for with the state. We do what's important for us, which you'll get asked is what do you need from us as far as an assessment goes. We'll be asking you, do you need California reg? Do you need the full TNI? Do you need the TNI -2? So we will need to know that before we can actually provide you a quotation for services. Once that quotation is provided to the laboratory and they're happy with the cost and commit to our contract, we then can start scheduling the assessment. So just to let everyone know, we do need some advance. So ensure to provide us enough time. So if you're applying for us for accreditation services and maybe your application is due as well for the state, you know, you have these timelines you have to meet. So you need to give us enough time, at least 60 to 90 days in advance, so we can find the best assessor for you. And then if you have non-conformances, you have a time frame to respond to that corrective action plan. So we just want to be able to, again, find a good assessor that's maybe close to you or a good fit for your scope within your time frames needed, because you always have to plan just for that corrective action period. And if you have to supply your application with your report, you, again, give yourself enough time to do that. Most assessments that we're doing are all conducted on site, unless there's a unless the laboratory is not doing drinking water, then we do seek permission from the state to do those through our remote assessment tool. Now that you know, are in the US anyway, the world's lightening up a little bit. We have actually, for our current client base, have been encouraging from the month of July going further into the year to perform on-site assessments as much as possible. So we feel that the remote assessment tool eventually will be fully going away, but we have done some parts of the assessment through our remote assessment tool. Once our assessment is over, we do provide a report, which will also come, I think what Caitlin said earlier, with a checklist and a list of things that we provide. So the report actually gets done by the assessor, comes to our headquarters office for a final review, and then will get issued by us as a final report with your corrective action timeline. Once the corrective action is approved, we then will issue a letter to you saying a recommendation letter or an approval letter of your corrective action with a copy of details of what's required in an MOU, with the example assessor information and the timeline of when things were approved, what standard we assessed, and then we'll also be providing you a copy of our checklist. Next slide. Just some general feedback observations from us. You know, laboratories should expect that our assessors will conduct a full system assessment to the standards selected. You know, we're not here to inform the clients, you know, what to do. We're a third-party accreditor. We're here to find things in your system where they're not complying to the standard. We do offer what's called preliminary pre-assessments because we understand that a lot of laboratories are going from California regulations to this large TNI standard. So we do offer that. That can go along with your initial or your reassessment contract. But again, you know, the pre-assessments are not here for, you know, for consulting. They're here to give you a laundry list of things that you need to work on before you do the real deal assessment. We also need to see the processes. We need to see your documents. We need to see data. So plans of addressing things would be an issue, would be a non-conformance. We do ask for documentation, you know, prior to your assessment. So do your best to provide that on time so your assessor can prepare themselves for your on-site assessment. But again, you know, we need to see some implementation of some new criteria that you have to put in place. So overall, just feedback, we've been had major issues so far. Again, I think we're all kind of still starting to accredit a lot of the laboratories. I'm sure we're going to have hiccups along the way. We've had a lot of support from various members of California Water Board, and really appreciate, you know, their input and feedback for us. And we really feel that it's going pretty well so far. So thank you very much, and I'll be here for questions at the end.
Thank you, Tracy. Next, we have Duncan Miller with International Accreditation Service.
Good morning, everybody. I assume you can hear me okay? Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so it's I'm Duncan Millar. It's easy to pronounce my name Miller, but it is Millar, and I'm with International Accreditation Service. I'm delighted to give you a few slides with an overview of our company and kind of how we're helping laboratories across California and beyond with accreditation services. On the next slide, you'll see my cheery face, and normally I'm much more stressed because I have 2 daughters in college and one about to join. So if you see me as your Uber driver in Southern California one of these days, you'll know why. I'm trying to earn a few extra bucks with that in mind. On the next slide, you will see that IAS is based here in Southern California in beautiful Orange County in Brea. We are an entity that is a part of a larger group that is called the International Code Council. That is a well-established 100-year-old organization that writes the building codes around the country, publishes the codes in many jurisdictions around the world as well. We are a nonprofit, and we are proud to say that we're the only T&I NGAB with headquarters in our beautiful Golden State. I want to tell you about 5 things that you need to know about IAS, and on the next slide, the first one you'll see is it's really about our people. A lot of organizations make claims that they're friendly and customer service oriented, and that's certainly true of IAS. Our leadership team communicates a kind of a team-oriented, ethical approach to our work, and we have a relentless focus on customer service and mission-based values, as well as the technical expertise that you would expect. On the next slide, you'll see that we are, as I said, a not-for-profit, mission-based, and our mission is to protect lives and property through the accreditation of competent organizations providing services, products, and oversight worldwide. So really, the way we kind of operate is that, yeah, we do have to make money and pay the rent, but our focus really is on the mission, and specifically to ELAP, as I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, is that we have a commitment to the ELAP ecosystem, as I call it, and beyond trying to close a sale, we're really interested in your success as a laboratory and our commitment to ELAP and all of its member organizations. On the next slide, again, about our people, we have a global perspective. We have operations across the globe, permanent staff in Delhi, Athens, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Seoul. On the next slide, you will see that the attributes of our people, we're told often that we're flexible, we're communicative, we're approachable, we have a flat organizational hierarchy. So if you need to reach myself, easily done. If you need to reach our president, Raj Nathan, easily done. Anybody else in our laboratory leadership team, those are easily accessible people. We don't have a strict hierarchy. So these are the attributes of our people: flexible, communicative, and approachable. On the next slide, you will see specifically about our leadership team for our laboratories, points such as credentialed, experienced, earnest, and vigilant. These are attributes and characteristics that we hear, and we're proud of that, those descriptors. On the next slide, you will see, this is my favorite slide in the deck. This is our laboratory leadership team. I call it the slide of unpronounceable names. You will see here a couple of familiar faces, Mohan Sabaratnam, who presented at the first conference down in Newport Beach in February before COVID, about 100 years ago. And so Mohan is kind of key to the ELAP program, but you'll see others as well. George Anastasopoulos, he's far friendlier than he looks, so he's a great guy. Prasanth Ramakrishnan, Demetrius Katsiros, based over in Athens. And then you will see Dr. Tony Francis. There's a picture of him just after high school, I believe. You may have seen Tony or you've heard him in our monthly webinars that we put on, that we've done for almost 12 months on the ELAP program. This is the heart of our laboratory leadership team, and these are the drivers of our ELAP program as well. On the next slide, people ask about who our assessors are, what are the qualifications, are they do they know ELAP, can they help us? Well, the assessors we have for ELAP are part of a team. We have almost 300 around the world, and specifically for ELAP, they're all familiar with their T&I standards, evaluation procedures, and checklists. They've taken some form of an ELAP assessor training. Tony Francis leads our assessment team. We're proud of that, and we have assessors up and down the state of California, and they will travel as needed outside to laboratories based outside of California. There's plenty of laboratories with certificates in Texas and Utah and beyond, so we're prepared to help along those lines. So we have 280 assessors around the world, and it's important to us that they take proper care of you, so we vet them well, we take good care of them, and in turn they take good care of you, and that's important to us. On the next slide, the presence is another attribute of IS I want you to know. We do have assessments conducted all around the world. In the United States, that's less than half of our assessments. So if you need something done in Mozambique or in Greece or in Botswana, these are places we've done assessments. And because of this, sometimes we're seen as the best kept secret in the U.S. assessment community, because we're definitely not as large as a lot of the other accreditation bodies, but we do have a global perspective and operations and experience all around the world. The next slide talks about our performance measurement. Probably a lot of organizations do this. We take great pride in this because we have for many years measured the outcomes. And as they always say, the old adage, what gets measured gets done. So what you'll see in the next slide is a screenshot or an example of one of our satisfaction surveys. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that when we ask people, how satisfied are you with, in this case, the assessment process or the quality of our IS assessors, we have really high ratings. 97% report satisfied or very satisfied. This is a survey that goes out blind, so they don't know, we don't know. It's anonymous, so the respondents can provide their answers and any feedback if they like. They know it's anonymous, so there's a purity of the answers that's important to us. On the next slide, you will see that we utilize a Bain & Company, which is a historic management consulting firm, the Net Promoter Score. One of the key questions is how likely is it that you would recommend a company or friend or a colleague? And the standard is 31. We're at 58, and we're proud of that as well. A couple more slides, and then I'll wrap it up. In terms of our programs, we have more accreditation programs than any other accreditation body. Some are ILAC and APAC under those signatories, but we design and custom schemes and programs. On the next slide, you'll see examples of those. Circled are the NELAP program and the California ELAP, but we also have some esoteric programs like manufacturing of cold form steel components and calibration labs. So we have a really wide scope of accreditation programs. The next slide is a partial global client list. Familiar faces there with USC, Honeywell, United Laboratories. So we've got, well, that speaks for itself. On the next slide, you will see what we've done so far with ELAP, and we're gaining momentum. It's a new program, and just as Perry Johnson said, we're building our momentum with our clients. We're delighted to be working with entities, jurisdictions as San Diego and Los Angeles, San Jose, and also private labs, great labs such as Physicists down in Orange County. So we're delighted to get this going, and the momentum is building as the need keeps to build as well. Next slide, we have the standard global recognitions, International Accreditation Forum, ILAC MRA, the Asia Pacific Accreditation Cooperation. We're highly involved in these entities, and prior to COVID, we go to these annual meetings all across the world. And then second last slide, the last thing to know about IS is our problem solving. Of course, we're proud to be part of the ELAP community. We have training webinars. And let me jump to the next slide, as I know we're short on time. You'll see in our training webinars, we've been doing these for a year now. Tony Francis has been putting them on. We have about 250 laboratory managers and technicians and all sorts of interested people. They've really been excellent. The next one is July 13th, and the cost is free, which is the best money can buy. and we encourage you to join us on these and future webinars on this topic. And on the last slide, part of my personal commitment to ELAP is that I've formed a LinkedIn group. That's a one-to-one networking tool for business. I encourage you to join me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I put together what I call the water cooler. I'm trying to build sort of a community on LinkedIn connected to ELAP and all things water. So that's my presentation. We're interested in your success. We're here to help you. We're a nonprofit. You can call us for information, for technical support, whether you use us for the assessment or not. We are here for you today and for the years and decades to come. And thank you, ELAP folks and State Water Board people. We're delighted to be here today. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you so much, Duncan. We appreciate that. Up next, we have Janetta Popovska from ANAB.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, if I can have the presentation, please. Good morning, California. Good afternoon to all the participants on the East Coast or my name is Janeta Popovska. I'm the Senior Accreditation Manager at ANAB, and today I was given 5 minutes to talk about ANAB, who we are, what we do as a third-party assessment agency for California ELAP. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see our corporate family. We are NC, American National Standard Institute, National Accreditation Board. We have 4 strategic business units. Next slide, please. ANAB offers accreditation and training services in a variety of markets for many different standards. We offer accreditation for product, process, and service certification bodies, as well as accreditation for testing and calibration laboratories and medical laboratories. ANAB also accredits management system certification bodies. We also offer services for forensic service providers and credentialing organization. As you can see here, ANAB is a one-stop shop for accreditation as well as training. Next slide, please. We are the largest accreditation body in the Western Hemisphere. We are signatory to ILAC, International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation and International Accreditation Forum. We have more than 3,000 accreditations in over 63 countries. We have a lot of environmental experience, and we offer currently more than 35 training courses. Next slide, please. ANAB offers accreditation to ISO programs, sector-specific programs and schemes. We have 72 paid professional staff, 99 technical assessors. We have 4 locations, and NC is the official U.S. representative to the International Organization of Standardization, ISO. Next slide, please. As you can see on this slide, those are the agencies that use ANAB accreditation body. We have contract with Department of Defense, Department of Energy. Also, we have currently our ASCA new FDA program. We also have the Environmental Protection Agency, and you can see on the bottom, the state governments. We are doing assessments to the TNI standard, currently with Florida, Louisiana, and right now with California. Next slide, please. With our environmental programs, as I've mentioned, we have a contract with DoD, Department of Defense Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. We are assessing laboratory to the QSM 5.3. Same with the Department of Energy, our DOCAP accreditation program. We are also assessing the TNI to TNI NGAP non-governmental accreditation body program to the TNI 2016. And also we have the EPA drinking water program assessing the EPA laboratories. Also, we are approved by Florida. We have the state programs by Louisiana and currently with California ELAP. Next slide, please. We have 18 qualified environmental assessors. We have more than 100 environmental assessments per year, 61 accredited environmental laboratories, 75 environmental scopes of accreditation. Currently, we have 29 accredited Department of Defense laboratories. as I've mentioned, to the QSM 5.3, 8 accredited Department of Energy laboratories, 5 accredited TNI non-governmental accreditation bodies laboratories to the NGAP program, TNI 2016, and numerous applicants for California ELAP program. We have currently, actually today, we have assessment happening right now with California to the California ELAP requirements. When considering ANAB as your accreditation body, apply as far as possible to allow for adequate scheduling. An early application will help facilitate a seamless, coordinated assessment process. ANAB typically schedules assessments at least 4 months prior to the assessment date. This allows for the best pairing of the laboratory scope and our technically skilled and knowledgeable assessors. ANAB assessors in the environmental discipline carry a variety of credentials. The demand for these specialties is very high. That is why we schedule it so far in advance to ensure that accreditation can be granted prior to any scope expiration dates and within the laboratory's expectations. Next slide, please. By doing these assessments, ANAB establishes a partnership with the laboratory. Our partnership is shown with the ANAB's commitment to the laboratory and the typical laboratory results. Our commitment of the value added is shown with the trusted quality. By using of the competent assessors, staff, and advisors, we are giving the laboratory the system to cooperate. Our assessments are cost effective and give the laboratory knowledge and ability to build an efficient process. We're doing our assessments with the highest integrity for the laboratory to have a defensible data. And by timely communication and service, we give the laboratory ability to communicate. Next slide, please. And if you want to request for a quote and call, you can go on our website, anab.nc.org. Or you can also find the educational offerings. As I said, we offer more than 35 trainings, different type of trainings. And if you need any technical support, you can call or email me on the email address and phone number below. Next slide. And thank you very much. Thank you to California ELAP for the invitation. This was an excellent, so far the first day is a very, very good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Janetta. Next up is Julie Kaiser from A2LA. And at this time, I want to remind everyone to please start submitting your questions for the third-party assessors in the Q&A chat box, because we will do that right after Julie's presentation. You're up, Julie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just want to thank California ELAP for giving me this opportunity for a few minutes to talk to you all today about A2LA and how we are continuously helping your environmental testing laboratories meet their assessment needs for your California ELAP accreditation. My name is Julie Kaiser, and I promise I will provide you with a wonderful picture of myself at the end of this presentation, so do not feel that you're going to miss out on a picture of me coming up shortly. But a little about myself, I'm an accreditation specialist at A2LA, and I am the lead staff member of our environmental testing laboratory state assessment program. Yes, that is a mouthful, we know that. And this focuses specifically on providing assessment services to individual laboratories that are just seeking an assessment to meet the accreditation requirements of their respective states. Next slide, please. So a little about A2LA. Since our inception, A2LA has worked to assist environmental testing laboratories meet the needs of their applicable regulators, whether that is state or federal, by staying up to date with those industry standards and regulations, as well as we continuously expand the services we offer. A2LA is recognized by federal regulators, including the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and the EPA, as well as state environmental agencies in Florida, Minnesota, Kentucky, Wyoming, and now California, and that's just to name a few, and certainly you can visit our website to get a full list of those. We continue to maintain an active role in environmental industry groups as well, such as TNI, FSEA, and ACIL. We also begun a relationship with CSEA, so the California Society for Environmental Analysts, this year, and we hope to increase our presence throughout 2021. This is going to allow us to better support your laboratory community through more than just these assessment services that we provide, but also with thoughtful content that's easily accessible to each and every laboratory through multiple outlets as well. Next slide, please. So as we move forward with the updated regulations and this transition to the 2016 TNI standard, I do want to highlight briefly just a few ways that A2LA has been helping laboratories and how we'll continue to do so moving forward. Since 2016, A2LA has played an active role in offering support and guidance to California's environmental testing laboratories. A2LA, along with representatives from TNI, conducted workshops to the TNI standard during that year as well to benefit the laboratories. And moving forward through 2020, we've participated in public forums, additional workshops, provided webinars, and all of that really allowed A2LA to share with the community what benefits the third-party assessment provider could offer to this program. Next slide. And now that we are diving into this transition to the 2016 TNI standard, and we're already going in head first, we're there, we're doing it. I just want to share with you some of the benefits that A2LA can offer your laboratory. So first and foremost, we offer flexible, value-added, thorough assessments. We have a wonderful core of highly skilled assessors who I certainly cannot talk enough about. They really are great, but they boast years of bench experience as well as experience providing assessments to the TNI standard and California ELAP regulations. So they will bring that knowledge into your lab, not just to assess you to that set of requirements, but also to improve your laboratory operations and provide confidence to the end users of your data. With a large number of assessors, we can offer laboratories that flexibility in scheduling that meets your timeline and really does it when you're looking to have that assessment completed. Our A2LA staff will provide you with one-on-one customer-focused care from the initial quote request all the way through to the completion of your assessment. We're going to answer questions, ensure that smooth path from start to finish while we provide you with that top quality customer service. We also know that having access to multiple TPAs, as obviously you've heard here today, there's several of us out there, that brings you a competitive marketplace. So not only can A2LA bring value to your assessment with that experience and customer service, but we aim to be competitive in cost as well. And that way we bring value to your laboratory on multiple fronts. We also know how valuable your time is. Many of our staff employees at A2LA have worked in laboratories ourselves, so we really get that firsthand experience of knowing what you're doing every single day. And each of you are an integral part of your laboratory and those communities that you serve. Many of you are municipal labs, so you're working directly with those communities as well. So we're continuously working behind the scenes to improve our processes to make sure that when you're reaching out to A2LA, you get the service you need, it's in a timely manner, and it's really exactly what you're looking for. So some examples of this is we just created a new electronic quote form, and that is now live on our website. So this captures more information up front. So we eliminate that additional outreach for information and really shortens the turnaround time for you to get that quote that you've requested from us. We also utilize a customer portal where all that information, once you decide that you want to have an assessment provided to you by A2LA, that customer portal is really going to house all that information and correspondence that's related to your assessment in one easy place. Next slide. So there you go. There's my picture. This is me. I know I've talked to a lot of you labs many times before, so I'm glad to meet you all virtually, but now, you get a person, so maybe you can put a name with the face. So at A2LA, we do know that these environmental testing laboratories all throughout California, you all now have a choice when it comes to your assessment provider. And for those labs who have already chosen A2LA, I truly, truly appreciate your confidence in us. It has been my personal pleasure to work with each and every one of you to serve your laboratory needs, whatever that may be, whether you have decided to have an assessment with us or it's really just to ask questions and let me help you answer those. So for those laboratories who choose to reach out to A2LA to develop that working relationship with us in the future, I also look forward to working with you and getting the opportunity to show you that same level of customer service and really world-class assessment services that A2LA prides itself on providing and what we really are known to do. So thank you all for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. All right. So now we're going to move into Q&A time for the TPAs. So if you guys have any questions you'd like them to answer, we're more than happy to pass them along. So here's one, and I will let you TPA representatives decide how you want to answer these and who's going to take which ones. And if you want to turn on your cameras, we'd be happy to see your faces. So this question says, can a TPA do on-site assessment for multiple labs if one of the lab uses sophisticated tests and the rest are non-sophisticated, mainly process control tests and one method for regulatory compliance? Also, we want to have the TPA conduct assessment for both renewals and amendment applications. Can a TPA block a 1 month time frame to do on-site for all labs? Is there a package? This is a multifaceted. Is there a package discount price? Do you require a 2 to 3 contract and a deposit?
This is Duncan with IAS. I'm sorry, my picture's not up there. I have a partial answer for this, and I'll defer to my our friends from the other TPAs. I can say that in general, we can answer all those questions, break it down one by one. Feel free to email me or any of the others, and we can break that down for you. We recognize that each entity has a unique set of circumstances. Sometimes there's a single lab, sometimes there are multiple. Some of the jurisdictions, for example, we worked with have some are sophisticated, main, satellite. So we'll break it down for you, put together a package as you suggest. So if you have 8 labs, then we're going to treat you differently than with 1 lab. Not treat in terms of quality, but in terms of our approach, maybe the total package price, this sort of thing as well. So that's one part of the question I'm comfortable answering, and I'll defer to the others for anything else.
This is Tracy from Perry Johnson, and we've had some larger laboratories come to us that have multiple sites that need to become accredited. Some of them vary in scopes, so that's not a big deal. I think we're all used to that with in our other industries that we serve. So we would just need to know the details. We need to know, is there a possible connection with the quality management system? Typically with us, if it's one company and they have multiple facilities, individually getting a separate accreditation with the state, we would want to send probably the same lead assessor. So they're familiar with the company structure is how we would set that up. Again, not a big deal if each laboratory wants a different test list, or even if they even have different standards. I mean, it's definitely possible that can actually come up. So to us, this is really nothing different, I think, than we all deal with in our 17025 world, which is probably, I think, the bulk of all of our business.
Hello, this is Janeta from ANAB. I want to add to what Tracy just said, that we first think that what we need to know is if the laboratory, that multi-site laboratory, has what type of a quality system they have. If they have all of them the same quality system, and if it is the same, then we'll reduce the days definitely for on-site assessment. Also, the very important thing is, as Tracy mentioned, to know the scope of accreditation. That will tell us exactly how many days we're going to be on site and what type of test methods, because as I've mentioned on my presentation, there's we have qualified assessors for if they're adding PFAS, if it's the very high tech, I should say the most sophisticated technology, LC-MS, then we're going to need a special qualified assessor for that. So there's a lot of things we need to know ahead of time. We're going to communicate with the laboratory, and we can do that. And definitely discount is always, because yeah, I mean, it's for a multi-site, we do that for the laboratories.
And I'll finally add here, I know with A2LA, there's a lot of play with that. And again, that flexibility of the lab, if it's something that, we can line up several assessments for multiple lab sites in 1 week, that saves you time, that saves you money, shared travel expenses and things of that nature for multiple lab sites that we can do all at one time and, knock out several assessments in 1 week. So certainly, as all the other TPAs had expressed, I think each of us pride ourselves on working with each lab specifically and really meeting your needs of what that is. And that's just having those one-on-one conversations with the staff members that you're assigned, and all of us have someone to do that. Certainly A2LA does as well, that is specifically devoted to this California ELAP program that can help you through that and really discuss exactly what you're looking for and the best ways to save.
Great. I'm going to actually pose this next one to Kate Hilty, just because it's a clarification of what the TPAs do. So I think it's important we get to it. It says the just to clarify, the TPAs are only to assess California labs and not to assess and accredit California labs. Only California ELAP will accredit labs based on the TPA's assessment.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I think that is a really important question to clarify, and I will just read my answer from the chat box. In-state labs are welcome to electively pursue accreditation by any one of the TPAs, but what we're doing in ELAP is using the assessment report to grant our own accreditation, because you have to be accredited by us, by California ELAP, in order to do regulatory work in the state. And so accreditation by a TPA does not substitute for California ELAP accreditation.
Perfect. And then I think all of you may have your own answer to this, so you can just round robin. This question from Thomas: is there a way to reduce costs by providing all the necessary documents before the visit so that the assessment requires less time?
This is Duncan again. I'm happy to start with. So preparation is always welcome. That by itself can help, but it's not necessarily a driver of our cost calculations. I think, as the other ladies were suggesting, the scope and some other factors are the drivers of the final cost. I imagine for all of us, if you were to engage us, let us know what that scope looks like. Sure, the preparation prior document submission is going to help, but ultimately the cost is going to come down to the scope, expectations, budget factors as well. But with IS, of course, you work with us and we'll get you a quote, a good deal, unquote. And I'm being facetious, but what I'm saying is that we'll customize the package based on, or the price based on your specific circumstances.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that, you know, the documentation review requirement is to help prepare the assessor to get to know your laboratory, also to avoid a premature assessment as well. So that's how we treat it. Of course, if the laboratory is very organized and they provide us more information, when the assessor gets there, you know, they will still confirm and review, you know, records related to certain processes that we ask for ahead of time. But it might help your assessment go along a little bit quicker or a little bit smoother. So it does not replace the on-site assessment.
Perfect. Julie or Janetta, do either of you want to add to that, and we'll make sure everyone gets a fair shot?
Yeah, I agree with Tracy and with the other accreditation body. The third party accreditation.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I think they both nailed it. So I would say A2LA has the same answer there.
Okay, perfect. And then here's a kind of a generic one for all of you too. How many days will the assessment take place for a typical sophisticated lab and a non-sophisticated lab? About how many in a team or party?
Well,
oh, sorry.
Okay, this is Janetta. Sorry. This is Janetta from ANAB. And again, without knowing the scope of accreditation, we can't really tell how many days it's going to take, the assessment is going to take. We have, I can talk with the other environmental laboratories, with the DoD labs that we are doing the assessments. If the scope is 45 pages, sometimes we have the assessment that takes 8 days on site to do, to assess and assess all those methods that are listed on their scope of accreditation. Again, without seeing the scope, we can't tell exactly how many days the assessment will take. If it takes 8 days, again, we might send 2 assessors, 4 plus 4, or maybe if it's 9 days, 3 plus 3 plus 3, maybe 3 assessors. But definitely, it all depends how large the scope of accreditation is. They're going to apply to California for accreditation.
Yeah, and I think similarly, I would agree with that really what we're doing when we speak to each lab is we're looking specifically at the scope of accreditation for your California ELAP accreditation that you have, and basing how many days on site it would take to do that thorough assessment. We really want to make sure, you know, that we're assessing your quality systems, that we're assessing your technical methods and all of that through the full on-site assessment. So really that on-site time is dependent on what that is, and that varies for each laboratory. And certainly, again, as far as how many assessors we would send on site, again, depending on your scope of accreditation. So certainly we want to limit the impact to your laboratory processes as much as possible. So, if we think that, sending 2 assessors on site for a shorter period of time is less impactful, and discussing that option with the lab versus, 1 assessor that may take, up to 4 days, where, you have to accommodate for that. So a lot of that really is dependent on the laboratory and what you're looking for and what those needs are. And we discuss those things with you. So it really is dependent on your lab.
Duncan here again. I'll just add one comment to this good comments before. When we set out on this journey a year or so ago, we kind of anticipated 1 assessor, 2 days. That we thought would be kind of the sweet spot. And thus far, we've had kind of good success with that, although it's been 1 assessor 1 day, 1 assessor 2, sometimes 3, or sometimes a 2x2, as was just mentioned. So I don't know where the bell curve falls on that, but my guess is 1 assessor 2 days for the typical lab, if there is such a typical lab.
I don't have much more to add. I agree with the quoting methodology of how we set up our assessments. We have to consider the scope of the laboratory as well as far as the number of assessors, especially if it's drinking water. Got to make sure we have the right assessors that are going to those facilities. Sometimes you might see a team if you're a larger laboratory, maybe 1 to help with the drinking water, other are doing non-drinking water activity or just doing the quality system. So again, it all depends on the size of the laboratory. We try to do our best with speaking to the laboratory, filling them out. How many people do you have? We have been quoting larger laboratories, but also very small ones too. So we are trying to be very accommodating to all sizes and types of facilities. And again, it's also based on your standard as well. So if you want T&I full, we also have our own criteria there where you'll be getting an accreditation from us, plus you'll get accreditation eventually from California. So there might be a little bit of differences and additional policies that we have that might come into play with those assessments, or you might want a DoD ELAP. So that's a totally different story where you might have additional requirements. So it all depends on what the laboratory is applying for.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank all of our TPAs for being here and being a part. And I just let our attendees know we will be posting all of the slideshows on the Slack channel. So you will have access to the PowerPoints, and all of their PowerPoints have their contact information in there. If you have additional questions or want to get in touch with any of them, we'll have those available on the Slack channel. That's it for today. So I want to thank everybody for coming and being a part. We're so glad you're here, and we will see you all tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.